won't be destroyed. The fact that you and I are working here today is evidence of that.
Recording in progress.
Boa tarde a todas, todos e todes. Estamos dando início à mesa 8, Políticas Emergenciais.
Good
Auxílios
afternoon.
financeiros
We're beginning our
Seminário
eighth
Internacional,
panel
Políticas Habitacionais de Aluguel
called
Social,
Emergency
organizado
Policies,
pela
Financial and
Faculdade de
Temporary
Arquitetura da
Assistance for
Universidade
Rent
de
of
São
our
Paulo e
International
pela
Seminar on Social
Secretaria
Rental
Municipal de
Housing
Habitação e
Policies,
Serviços
supported by
Públicos.
the Municipality of
Somos
São
aqui pela
Paulo
Colpani,
and
da
the
Mestre
Rosa
Urbanística,
Luxemburgo
formada pela
Foundation.
FAU-USP e atualmente trabalha como
I'm,
professora no
I am
Departamento de
Beatriz Silva.
Planejamento da CEA.
I study at the
A mesa contará com a
FAU-USP.
apresentação de 5 trabalhos
We will have
referentes às
5
autoras e autores.
presentations
Luciana Alencar
in
Ximenes, da
this
Universidade
panel.
Federal do
We
Rio de
have
Janeiro, Lucas
Luciana Alencar
Golignac Lessa,
Ximenes
Luana
from
Rodrigues
Rio
da
de
Silva
Janeiro,
e
Luana
Antônia
Rodrigues da
Eloína
Silva,
Fernandes
Lucas
Andrade,
Golignac
da
Lessa, and
Prefeitura
Antônia
Municipal de
Eloína Fernandes
Rosane
Andrade from the
Biasotto,
Municipality of
da
Sobral in Ceará.
Biasotto da Vale, Thalia Reginelli
Also,
Fernandes da
Cira
Universidade
Souto da
Federal do Rio Grande do
Thalia
Norte,
Reginelli da Fernandes,
Clarissa Correia de Souza
Fabiola Xavier
Pessoa
Rocha, Feira
Filho,
Lima,
Rocha Ferreira Lima,
Pralia Lima,
Carla
Carla
Manuela
Manuela
Ribeiro Ora, da Universidade
Ribeiro
Federal de
Ora from the
Goiás.
Federal
Nós também
University of
contamos com a
Goiás.
participação da
And we
debatedora
also
Isadora
count with our debater,
Isadora,
Isadora
professora
Ribeiro.
doutora,
Has a
graduanda em
PhD in
FAU-USP
FAU-USP since
desde 2023.
2023.
Graduação, mestrado e
She
doutorado
has
no
also a
Instituto da
master's degree
Privacidade
and a PhD
LabCidade.
and coordinates
É coordenadora do
LabCidade.
coletivo Zina, no qual
She
desenvolve
coordinates
tese nos
the
trabalhos de projeto
collective
com temas
Zina,
de habitação
working with
brasileira com
projects
financiamento público e
on
movimentos
housing
populares de luta por
and
moradia.
social movements for the
Sua linha
rights
de pesquisa
to
é voltada à
housing.
produção de habitação, planejamento urbano
It is related
territorial,
to
políticas
the
públicas e
territorial
movimentos
urban
populares, articulando a
project
realidade
and
local do
social
Brasil com a
movements,
conjuntura de predominância financeira
working
mundial.
with
É,
the
Os estudos
reality
que
of
acompanham a mesa de
global
hoje trazem o
finances.
uso do aluguel como uma
Today we're
forma de
going to
auxílio
talk
precário. O
about
auxílio aluguel tem a
the
necessidade de retirada
rent
da
as
população de
an aid
famílias que receberam
for
políticas
social
públicas
movements
ou de área de risco à vida de
and
lugares
for
ambientais
when
críticos,
areas of risk,
fazem que muitas vezes o auxílio aluguel,
the
também
way in
conhecido
which
como auxílio
the
aluguel, se confunde e
aid
mescla ou
rental
complementa
assistance
políticas de
is
locação
confused
social,
or is
como
used
belo
as
dizer.
just as a complement
O conjunto
to
de
other
dados
social
apresenta um panorama da
assistance
escala do
programs.
problema e
Here we're going to
perspectiva de
see the
cada
scale
região.
of the
Na
problem and
realidade,
how
os
we're
riscos
trying to
têm
solve
intensidade
these
em distintas
problems
regiões do país.
and the need in
Goiás,
different
Natal, Niterói,
areas
Petrópolis, Rio
of
de Janeiro,
the
Sobral,
country.
Brumadinho, Belo
In
Horizonte, Campinas, Juiz de
several
Fora,
cities in
Sergipe e
all
Pelotas.
areas of the
Organizamos todos
country.
esses auxílios
We
financeiros
organize
referentes à
this
moradia,
panel
sistematizados juntos a iniciativas complementares de
regarding these
políticas públicas
specific
públicas
areas in
nacionais
order to understand how they're being implemented in those several areas and how they are used as emergency policies. We'll talk about risk areas or climate emergencies and other disasters. Now, the order of our presentations, we're going to start with Luciana Alencar Ximenes, entitled The Experience of Financial Assistance for Rent in the City of Rio de Janeiro and Its Connections with Forced Displacement. Then we will talk about the social rental program of Sobral-CE, a qualitative and quantitative analysis of its governance model and institutional arrangement based on public management practices, presented by Lucas and Luana, who are representing Professor Antônia Eloína Fernandes Andrade. The third project is social rental as a measure to repair the córrego do Feijão in Brumadinho, Minas Gerais, presented by Rosane Biasotto. Then we will move on to Thalia Regina Lira Fernandes' presentation called Impacts and Challenges of the Social Rental Policy, Lessons from the Case of Natal and the Role of Rental Assistance. And for last but not least, we'll have Fabíola Xavier Rocha with Challenges and Perspectives of Housing Policy in Goiás, Analysis of the Metropolitan Region of Goiânia and the Issue of Social Rent, presented by Larissa Correia de Souza Bressan, Fabíola Xavier Rocha Ferreira Lima, and Carla Emanuela R. Ribeiro Ora. Each presentation will count with 12 minutes, and at the end, we will open for our debater, Isadora Ribeiro, which will also have 12 minutes for her remarks. I will be responsible for controlling the time, and I will give the 5-minute advice. And we can also ask questions through the chat on YouTube and here on Zoom, and we will try to have more than one round of questions. These presentations are being streamed live on YouTube and will be made available on our website. We would like to thank our supporters, which are FAPESP, USP, the Oswaldo Chimbumbu Foundation, and the Global Observatory on Short-Term Rentals. So, Luciana, the floor is yours. If you would like to share your screen, we are ready. I think everyone can see my presentation. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be able to share our work. I would like to talk about some preliminary results of our study and try to concentrate on these assistance policies in the city of Rio de Janeiro with the focus on the year of 2010. This is a little bit of our overall context and then what the city of Rio de Janeiro has overcome during these years. We had the intensification of urban conflict in large Brazilian cities and the launch and implementation of 2 federal programs, PAC and MCMV, with all of their contradictions that we will not be able to explore here, but it is important to have them in mind. The PAC became an accelerator on the federal level, and the PMCMV, Casa Minha Vida, that also accelerated these housing projects. And all of this also served as intensificators of displacements by opening new infrastructure works and remodeling works. In Rio de Janeiro, we had this a very emblematic context in which we lived this time very intensely with this real estate boom and the Olympic cycle. And this reflects that between 2009 and 2015, at least 22,000 families were displaced by the municipal government. And at the same time, the city concentrated over 10% of all PAC and Minha Casa Minha Vida investments. But here you can see this scenario of displacement of people towards the periphery of the cities. is the Minha Casa, Minha Vida was a great catalyzer for that, which is the little yellow houses, and be with people
E
leaving
aí, na
the more
pesquisa,
valued
eu
areas
tenho
of the city.
tentado,
And
primeiro, conceituar,
in
estudar,
terms of
depois
social
nisso, o que eu tenho
rent,
chamado de política
I'm
de apoio
trying
social. Eu tento
trying
dar esse
to put it
nome,
in the context of what I
nessa
call
nomenclatura,
the
para facilitar, e aí tem
social
diversas concessões de recursos
policies,
financeiros, temporários,
but it's
flexíveis,
also
de
related
acesso ao
to
aluguel. E eu
financial
entendo que
assistance
posso
and
compor
short-term rentals,
estratégias
which have
específicas
changed
populares ao longo desse período que eu estou analisando.
all
E isso
the
reflete em
policies
realidades
along
diferentes
this
dos municípios
time
brasileiros,
period
por
we're
exemplo,
talking about.
e já aponta que mais da metade dos municípios
And
brasileiros
more than
têm
half of
políticas de concessão de
Brazilian
habitação. Porém,
municipalities already
existem
have
outros
some kind
municípios
of
que já têm um caráter
program
maior,
to
por exemplo,
assist with
Sobral, uma das
rent.
políticas mais presentes, um dos componentes da política habitacional mais
And
presentes nos municípios brasileiros. E aí, alguns aspectos
it's a few
dessa
aspects
política
of
pública
these
que eu acho que
policies,
caracteriza essas políticas também, como elas têm sido
but
experimentadas em outras
they
regiões
are
locais.
in the
E aí, o
large
desafio da
cities.
política
They
pública é
present
central,
a
o atendimento
main
a famílias de baixa renda
objective
de forma
to serve
emergencial.
low-income families in an emergency and transitory way.
Elas passam a compor o que eu tenho chamado
They
de
are
rede
part of the
alternativa
range of
habitacionais, ou seja, uma rede de unidades
alternative
habitacionais
housing in the process of
estabelecidas no
forced
município de forma
displacement.
antecipada. Elas são
They are
fragmentadas e estruturas que
fragmented
envolvem
and
alguns municípios de diversos
restricted
estados.
policies
São
to
pagaments
local
mensais
spheres
especificamente
with great
registrados
diversity and
para
different
promoção
denominations,
aos
and they
beneficiários
are
reais,
usually made
e elas
through
estão diretamente relacionadas, portanto, com
monthly
recursos fiscais,
payments done
com esse
directly
foco
to
central
the
na política.
beneficiaries,
Da
and
mesma
they're
forma que
related to
algumas
this
outras políticas que
the
foram impulsores na
emergency and
cidade do Rio
forced
de Janeiro,
displacement, and a
de
few
forma bastante breve, porque já tem um
policies
tempo
on
que elas
social rent
existem.
in Rio de
A
Janeiro
gente tem
between
duas políticas, uma que
2000 and
foi
2010. We have
fruto de
two
acordos
basic policies,
tripartidos para
which is the
organizar a
temporary
moradia,
housing
que trouxe
assistance
algumas
from
imagens
the
de
municipality of
pagamentos
Rio de Janeiro and the Morar
seguros para as
Seguro or Live
pessoas que
Safe
estão nessa
program
forma de pagamento
from
em
the state
dia, de aprovação do
government.
valor, e também essa
And
primeira
that they
foto
are
traz a
very
manifestação contra a
here you can see in the
urbanização
pictures you
que
have
foi
some
feita no
a
setor alemão,
protest
no Complexo do Alemão, e
in the
enquanto as
Complexo do
famílias
Alemão
foram devolvidas,
favela
ainda não tinham sido assentadas.
before the families were
E aí,
settled.
entrando um pouco nessa política
So
municipal,
we'll talk about
a
the
política
municipal
municipal,
policy,
auxílio habitacional temporário, que é o
the
HT,
temporary housing
ela
assistance,
constitui parte
AHT. It is
específica dessa rede, né?
structured
Que quando a gente vai analisar os marcos
uh,
normativos, eles são muito
through the
claros e têm
normative
todos
framework
identificado
that
isso.
are very
Ela, por
always
exemplo,
being
nessa nomenclatura,
replaced, so
auxílio
it's not
habitação, auxílio
stable.
aluguel, auxílio aluguel,
You have
e aí hoje
several
elas
here,
vivem na
Auxílio
fase
Habitação, which is a
inicial, né?
housing
Foram criadas desde novembro de
assistance, a
1996
provisional
pelo
assistance,
município,
or
realizados pela
there's
Secretaria de
rent
Habitação.
assistance. It
Em
began in the
2001, ele passou por um
1990s as the
processo
Programa
específico de
Favela
modificação de
Bairro. In
limitações em assentamentos populares
2001,
com
there was the
normativas
inclusion of
definitivas e
relocation
definições operacionais
guidelines
que mostram
for
isso.
popular
E aí, lá
settlements
em
in
2011,
buildings. In
foi criada a
2011,
presidência dos novos municípios
the
do CMH, da
its
Secretaria de
scope
Habitação,
was
opera
expanded
sozinha,
for
realizada pela Secretaria de Governo
projects of
Federal. Em
interest
2013, ele ganha
of
esse nome, Auxílio
public
Habitacional
interest.
Temporário,
In
e sai das
2013,
diretrizes
the
regulamentares.
Auxílio Habitacional
E aqui
Temporário was
ele entra
created
no valor
and
das
inserted in the
concessões
relocation
municipais.
and the guidelines
E
with
já
new
a política
procedures.
estadual, ela
And the
reflete,
state
dentro das
policy
critérios ambientais
reflects
desses marcos
uh,
normativos, ela reflete muitas normativas
these
municipais.
the municipal
O auxílio também é
norms,
incluído nas
and
diretrizes de
it's
mobilização
also
da
included
Secretaria de
in
Habitação
the
e do
guidelines
Governo do
for
Estado.
re
Ele ganha esse nome em 2010 como Programa
relocations.
Morar
In
Seguro, e
2010,
o
it
valor pago está
becomes the
centrado
Programa
aqui,
Morar
mas
Seguro
varia em alguns casos, né?
and
Depende
has
do tipo de
values of
casa, por
400
exemplo,
reais, but with a few
questões específicas.
exceptions.
E aí eu trouxe alguns dados,
And here I have
talvez que mais contribuam para a gente
the
debater, né?
data that contribute to our
Das duas
debate
políticas.
here
O auxílio
of
habitação
both
temporário é
policies.
apresentado como um
The
benefício pessoal
temporary
com perfil
housing
direcionado
assistance
para
is a
imóveis
provisional
habitacionais por obras
benefit
determinadas.
with the name
Então, ele
to
atende tanto a famílias
pay for
promovidas por obras
the
de residência
rent
pública,
for
quanto famílias
housing for a
estruturadas de
determined
forma
period of
flexível para
time.
casos
It
específicos,
serves
que é o específico.
families whose
Ele
households
abrange
were
todos os níveis, podendo ser
totally or
remodelado,
partially demolished
exceto
in
nas catástrofes naturais, ou seja,
due
aqueles
to
municípios que têm
interventions in urbanization and
características de,
infrastructure
enfim, mais
works,
restrita à
or
renovação,
that
por
they
exemplo.
were destructed
Até hoje,
partially or
ele
totally
tem
by natural
vigência esse
catastrophes.
programa, né, que foi
It
criado.
it
Já
lasts
foi
for
feito
12
mais de 15
months.
mil
That can be
estudos
renewable.
atendidos
There are already over
mais de
15,000
10 mil foram
families
atendidas, exatamente, e
contemplated.
mais de
Another
30 foram
10,000
atendidas em
were
outra medida, né,
included from
como
other
tentativa de exclusão,
programs
como
like the
medida
Minha
para
Casa
não
Minha
financiamento.
Vida program.
E uma característica importante é que...
And then
Obrigada. É que
And
ela
an
está
important
presente
characteristic is that it is
para
present
remoções em mais de
in
330
over 337 localities in the state of Rio de Janeiro. The graph here, the chart shows the number of beneficiaries that entered in 2011 with the change in the policy and the change in the municipality.
de onde saíram essas famílias,
This
né?
is a map from where the
Você
families
percebe, e é
left.
muito importante, percebe como é bem
And you can
disparado, né?
see
Várias
that
regiões,
it's
vários
where
lugares
we
do
have
Brasil,
many
concentrados em alguma
evictions
área
and mostly
da,
concentrated in
dos
one
complexos de favela.
part of the city and
E
all
lá
the
no programa
favela
Morar Seguro,
complexes.
eles
And the Morar
fizeram,
Seguro
que organiza, faz
program
parcerias com
is
municípios.
organized through
Quase 30
partnerships with the
municípios
municipalities,
participaram,
have over
e na maioria
30
estavam
municipalities
concentrados nas
participating.
áreas onde o
In the Rio de
pagamento
Janeiro
foi
city is concentrated
aqui a gente
in
vê
the
o exemplo
places where
do
the
pagamento
PAC
online, né? Aqui
project,
no
the federal
município, a gente vê
project,
que no município
was
de
implemented. We can see that here we see in
eles não têm
blue, we have Rio
parado,
de Janeiro,
né, o pagamento.
and you see
Eles
that the
conseguem
payments have
realizar
been
e não saíram, né?
kept
Bom,
stable
já que a maioria delas
in
entraram. A
time.
maioria
So we
entraram.
haven't had much
E tem
turnover in the families that were
as
benefited.
possíveis pagamentos que estão
And then
proliferando e
most of these
reduzindo
payments you can see that are in
esses
the most
pagamentos
mountain
prejudicados.
cities
E aqui
due
os
to
pagamentos
environmental
ao governo, a gente vê
issues
que do governo estadual estão bastante
and extreme
concentrados.
events. And you can see that the
Nós vimos em
government
alemão,
budget is
quando tivemos
concentrated in some
PAC
peripheral areas
estadual.
of the favelas, for example.
E aí, caminhando então
And
para esse fim, agora um pouco mais
now to
final,
conclude,
ao longo da pesquisa eu tenho tentado
throughout the
ver quais são os
research,
motivos que têm
I
levado as
tried
remoções
to
e
analyze
realmente qual foi
what are the
o efeito que
motives
tem
for
havido e entender um
the
pouco o papel do auxílio a
displacements
partir
and
dessas
the
pesquisas para
impact
várias
of the
remoções. Então, eu tenho
assistance.
tentado pensar em três
And
grandes
I've been trying
grupos.
to think of
Primeiro, a
we
urbanização de
divided that in
favelas, né,
three
que foi
groups.
uma
The
das
urbanization of favelas is the
evidências que a
first
gente
one,
tem.
which is
E
very
aí,
evident and
percebe que
done by
eles surgem,
the
né, logo de
state
início, como
government.
uma resposta a esse
And it is a
desamparo, seja
response
temporal ou de número de unidades, e
to
crescente
this
das urbanizações
differences
e as opções de financiamento.
in the number of
E aí,
housing
nesse
projects.
caso, a gente tem a expectativa do
And we
resultado de
have the
fundo muito robusto, que a gente
expectation
vê no programa Minha Casa Minha Vida.
that in the future
E
it will be
aí,
funded by the
percebi
Minha Casa Minha Vida
como também tem
program.
sido, foi, né, por muito tempo, a forma
And
dos
for
governos locais de lidar com
it was a way
a falta desse instrumento
for
na
the
política federal.
for the
Então,
local
parece nos
governments
municípios,
to
né, no caso,
deal
não
with
sabemos
this
de que forma,
lack and this
esse
of
evidente
housing
descompasso.
projects and
Com
to
relação à
try to solve this
habitação, né, que foi
differences
muito presente no
in
programa de
between the
LabCidade,
offer and the demand.
o
And
aluguel aparece
then
muito
here,
viabilizar
you
preços
know that
próprios, né?
the
E a
rental
gente tem
comes
tempo
as one of the
natural,
tools to solve
tempo político,
while
a
the
cláusula do tempo da política
constructions are being
habitacional.
carried
Me
out.
pareceu importante porque ele
So it's
agiliza os
temporary,
processos
yes, and
remocionais.
this really
E ele é
helps
visado como mediador de
and
conflitos também, né?
accelerates
Ele permite fazer
the
as remoções
the replacement of people, the resettlement, and also to solve the conflicts.
que demandam a saída das famílias
Because
por mil motivos. E acho que o poder público municipal tentou
the
fazer isso
municipal
rapidamente, de uma forma
uh,
bastante
government was
comum.
able to
Enfim, e aí o
unite these
terceiro
programs and
motivo, que eu acho que é
do this.
importante,
The
do
third,
debate atual, é como ele vem em resposta a esses riscos
when you have these
socioeconômicos, né?
great
E aí, por isso,
large
a gente tem
urban
visto
projects, the
uma
rental
alta
was
procura
one of the
por
solutions
moradores
for
que
displacement
recebiam
of
salários
people.
que eles não
And then you have the
ganhavam,
third
né?
item that is a
Então,
social
renda
and
própria,
environmental
leis,
risks.
etc. E que a
Then
gente vê que no
2009 and
final, né,
2010 were
é aí que realmente se
important
destacam essas
marks.
políticas. E
In
aí
the,
tem
here you
duas
have the
ameaças
assistance
claríssimas desses
to
projetos
victims
e
of
também o suporte a
these
remoções que são
strategies,
ligadas
but
às leis e ao
also
uso
to
eficácio, porque eu acho que
displace
aqui
these people and
são,
resettle them,
enfim, é uma
taking them out
saída,
of
né, um uso
risk
secundário do
areas as a
dispositivo nesse
preventive
mínimo.
measure.
E aí são remoções mais
And
preventivas.
these displacements
Mas também a gente vê esse argumento, né, sendo
are
usado
also
para
justified
preservação ambiental, né, contra a
as
degradação
a
ambiental. Então tem esse argumento
prevention,
também.
environmental prevention,
E
and
aí eu queria
also because
destaque aqui mais à
they
frente
come
quatro
from the
indicadores
urban disorder,
desde
and
a
they
urgência,
also
nesse
we
emergencial,
should also
mas
highlight the
a
emergency
efetividade dele
aspect
depois.
of these
E aí,
displacements
esse é o fim, né,
in our work.
da apresentação. Eu acho
And
que a
this is the end
discussão
of my
seria como que essas
presentation, which is a
políticas,
discussion on
que
how
condições de vida e que condições de moradia essas
these
famílias
what
promovem,
what is
essas
the
políticas promovem para as famílias
what
atendidas.
what is the
E aí,
situation, the
no
life
Rio, a
condition
gente
that
vê
these
que o auxílio
policies promote for these
compõe
families?
esse
In Rio de
repertório,
Janeiro,
né,
we
de
have these
participação
projects
nos
that
processos de
compose
remoção
this
no território popular.
repertoire
As famílias
of
casadas que vivem em espaços,
displacements,
né, chama de
and we
berçários
see
temporários,
that
acabam entrando numa
this
situação de
benefit
precariedade, devolução, temporariedade,
brings some kind
Então,
of
isso vai de encontro para as críticas que a professora
brings some
Beatriz
kind of
coloca.
the entering this social rent reinforces the condition of transitoriality and instability for these families. And then these families are reinserted in new housing projects but are also subject to new displacements with new projects and also in risk areas. And while in areas that are really precarious. And these programs help solve that, giving these people more stable housing. I would like to apologize for exceeding my time, and thank you very much. These are my contact information. We'd like to call Lucas and Luana that will are also representing Professor Antônia that will present the program of the experience of the social rental program of Sobral, a qualitative and quantitative analysis of its governance model and institutional arrangements based on public management practices. Good afternoon. Can I share my screen? Yes, please. And then I will start counting the time. Okay. Você já começou.
Vocês estão vendo a tela?
Can you see my screen?
Sim, essa não está em tela cheia ainda, se
Yes,
quiser.
but it's not full
Pronto.
screen yet. There you
Agora
go.
sim, né? Ótimo. Boa tarde a
Great.
todos. Eu me
Good
chamo
afternoon,
Luana, sou
everybody.
arquiteto urbanista. Atualmente
I am
estou à frente da
Luana. I'm an
controladoria
architect and an
de
urbanist,
habitação,
and I'm
regularização
currently
fundiária da
the
Secretaria de Urbanismo,
coordinator
Habitação e Meio Ambiente
of
de
land
Sobral.
regularization in the
Estou junto ao Lessa, né?
Urbanism
Logo
Secretariat
mais vai
of
se apresentar
Sobral.
também.
And
Nosso trabalho,
I'm here
ele
with
se
my
volta
colleague who
a
will
uma
introduce
análise da
himself.
implementação do Programa
And
de Locação
my
Social no
work
município,
is about the social
principalmente a
rent
partir da
program
nossa
in the
experiência
municipality,
enquanto
especially our
gestores da esfera
experience
pública,
as
né?
public
E também
managers,
com base em
and
dados
also
coletados
based on
a partir de uma
data
pesquisa que foi realizada no âmbito do Programa Cidade Empreendedora,
based on
programa
a
realizado em parceria com o
research
Sebrae,
called
pelo município,
Entrepreneur City,
que visava a
which was in
promoção
partnership with
de
Sebrae,
geração
the
de renda e
municipality,
desenvolvimento socioeconômico.
that aimed to generate
Então,
income
para
and
situar
also targeted
o
social
programa
and economic development.
no âmbito do município, a gente
So,
trouxe uma breve
in order
contextualização
for
de Sobral.
the program to be implemented
Sobral
in the
está localizada
municipality, we considered the
a pouco
context
mais de
of
200 quilômetros
Sobral,
de Fortaleza, que é a
a
capital do
city
estado do
that is
Ceará.
about 200 kilometers
Ela
from
está localizada
Fortaleza,
nessa
the
porção
capital
norte
of
do
the state of
estado e ela se
Ceará,
destaca como
in the
uma das
northern
áreas de
part of the
influência, né,
state, and it is one of the
da
areas
região,
of influence in the
por ser
region
uma cidade que tem uma grande capacidade de
because it
atração de
is a
fluxos,
city
uma
that
boa oferta de
attracts a lot
serviços, de infraestrutura
of
e de
people. It
empregos,
has a good offer
e
of
também pela sua
services,
gestão territorial,
infrastructure,
né?
and
Então,
jobs,
ela é hoje
and
a
also
cidade
because
polo
of
dentro de
its
uma região
territorial
metropolitana.
management. It is
Conta com uma
the
população de
central
pouco mais
city
de
of a
200 mil
metropolitan
habitantes.
region. It has a
E
population
grande
of a
parte dessa
little over
população, né,
200,000
75%, está
inhabitants, and a
concentrada
large part of that
no núcleo
population,
urbano principal, que é a
75%,
sede do
is in the
município, né,
main
que é esse
urban
núcleo que está destacado no
center,
mapa
the
da
headquarters
região
of the
superior.
municipality,
Em relação à
which
implementação
is
da política de
highlighted in the
habitação
map
no
here,
município, a
and
gente
about the
trouxe uma linha do
implementation
tempo
of
com
the
alguns
housing
marcos
policy in the
institucionais
municipality. We have a
dos últimos
timeline with some
27 anos, né, que
institutional
começa
landmarks
na
in the
gestão
last
do prefeito
27
Cid Gomes,
years,
com a instituição da gerência de
starting in the
habitação da
management of
Secretaria de
Mayor
Desenvolvimento
Cid
Urbano e Ambiente,
Gomes,
a instituição do primeiro plano diretor de
and
Sobral, que
the
foi o Plano
implementation
Diretor
of
de
the
Desenvolvimento
first
Urbano, em
master plan of
1998, e
Sobral,
no ano
the urban
subsequente,
development plan
a
in
criação e
1998,
instituição do
and in the
Fundo Municipal
following
de Apoio à
year,
Habitação Popular e do Conselho
the
Municipal
creation
de
of the
Habitação, que estava encarregado pela
Municipal
gestão desse
Fund
fundo.
for Popular Support and the Housing
Então,
Council.
a gente percebe que ao longo dessas três
So
gestões,
throughout the
a parte
three
da habitação ela esteve
administrations,
sempre associada à
the
parte do desenvolvimento
adaptation
urbano e do meio ambiente, né? Em
department
2005, com a
has always been
gestão
related
do
to
prefeitura
urban
Lucas Golignac
development and the
Lessa, ela
environment.
passou a incorporar a
And then
Secretaria
in
de
the
Habitação e Saneamento Ambiental.
And then Mayor Leonidas took over the part of sanitation. And in 2011, in Leonidas' second term, the Secretariats of Infrastructure and Urban and Environmental Planning were separated into two different secretariats, and also an important landmark is the elaboration and consolidation of the housing plan, of the social housing plan in 2012, which had a diagnosis for the municipality's housing situation. But in 2017, there was a rupture through an administrative reform. The adaptation sector was incorporated into human rights, and it only became part of the Housing Secretariat once again in 2022, very recently in 2022, 2023. So in this context, we have the implementation of the social rent program that was created according to a municipal law of 2017, according to during Mayor Evo's administration, and it was meant to offer exceptional aid that may reach 450 reais for families in a situation of serious social vulnerability, and the beneficiaries are divided into two groups: families that come from housing reform programs and that need a temporary solution during the transition period between the old to the new and the new house, and families that are part of the social assistance network, also families that are very vulnerable but that were forwarded by the social assistance system, by the civil defense, or by other assistance programs. And to illustrate the inclusion process of the program, we brought this flow showing the administrative sectors involved in the process, which is centralized by the social housing department, which is responsible for receiving the demand and for the first contact with the beneficiary, where some initial information is raised and it's verified if there is a need for an engineer, should there be structural risk in the house. And based on that visit, the reports are written to support the request and the forwarding to the program. So after they're approved in the program, that we sign a term of agreement with the beneficiary and they start receiving the aid. I now pass the floor to Lessa, who will continue my presentation. Thank you, Luana. Well, just to further illustrate about the institutional structure of housing in which the social rent program was inserted, like Luana said, in the first term of Mayor Ivo Gomes, the housing coordination was part of the Human Rights and Social Assistance Secretariat, and then we had the housing coordination and a project management unit, a special project management unit focused on land regularization. So during the first term, that's how housing worked in the Social Assistance Secretariat, coordinated by a social assistant, and the social rent program was one of the main programs in the housing actions in the municipalities. How many minutes? Sorry. 5 minutes. Do I have left? Yes. Oh my God. Okay, so in the second administration by the same mayor, in housing and land regularization, next one, Luana. And then we go into this context when housing leaves the social assistance secretariat and comes back to the urbanism secretariat. I'm invited to be the first coordinator, and now Luana is the coordinator, and we have 23 people, 23-person staff to run some programs, including social rent in the Sobral local government. And this is during the Bolsonaro administration with a series of measures that he took to reduce local taxes. This really hindered the budgets of the municipalities, and Sobral, a medium to small city, had its budget compromised. And currently, we only have 10 people working in the Secretariat for the entire municipality. And when we joined the administration in 2022, these guidelines are not expressed anywhere. They were just written here to illustrate, but what we started doing when housing came back to the Urbanism Secretariat, we tried to standardize the flows of referrals from partners of the network. There were many referrals from CRAs, from other partners that saw social rent only as a financial aid. So, oh, someone is in extreme poverty, the housing issue was not really addressed. They were forwarded to social rent as a financial aid. So we did training with social assistants from the other departments so that they could actually understand what is a housing demand and what would be the flow they should follow to demand that type of aid. And the law is also very encompassing in terms of who can be a part of the program. So almost anyone could, and we created a prioritization based on some situations to create 3 levels of seriousness: light, serious, and urgent. And we try to focus, as was a guideline for housing in this new period, in constructions and housing renovations to include families and focus on the people and families that had a perspective of no longer needing the benefit, considering the benefit is supposed to be temporary. And we had families that were in social vulnerability, and they had to create strategy, and we had to create strategies to overcome their socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And that's when SEBRAE created the Entrepreneur City program that did a research with 68 families in a social rent program, the heads of the families and some members of the families. And we saw that the huge majority of the families were led by Black women, single mothers in extreme social vulnerability. And this work of the Entrepreneur City was meant to provide training on entrepreneurship for beneficiaries of social programs. And we saw that there was no chance that we could talk about entrepreneurship with the social rent public, because there weren't no minimum basis for these people to think about being entrepreneurs. They were in a very serious situation of vulnerability. And then next slide, since we're short on time, just a current overview. When we started the program, there were 120 families. We reduced that because we also delivered some projects, but we have 4 projects of families that are almost becoming independent from the benefit, 15 that were cases of renovations that people participated during the temporary period for renovation. Housing was never really a priority in the last administration. So these projects, many of them were discontinued, and these families have been waiting for the rebuilding of their houses for a long time. If you could please conclude, Lessa, because your time's up. And 30 families that went into the program in a vulnerable situation. And since we have a small team, there is no plan for these families to develop themselves
como resultado,
socioeconomically
né, a
and
gente
for them to
vê
no longer need
que
the
de
benefit.
fato
And
o
as a
programa tem um
result,
potencial
we
de,
see
enfim,
that the
nessas
program
situações
has the
emergenciais
potential
e nessas situações
of
que a gente precisa
during
remover
emergency
pessoas para, por exemplo,
situations and
reformar
in
a casa
situations where we need
ou
to remove
urbanizar,
people
né?
to,
Teve
for
dois projetos
example,
de urbanização também,
renovate the
que mostra como
house or
importante, né? O
do
problema não é o
urban
valor, né? Está longe
construction.
de
It's
ser,
an
sim, uma cidade
important
pequena, 450, pelo que eu entendi da apresentação da
project,
Luciana. É
and
maior do
the
que o Rio
problem
de
is
Janeiro, pelo que
not
eu entendi. Se é isso
the
mesmo.
amount,
Mas é isso, muitos
because
obstáculos
450
operacionais, a gente não
reais
tinha nenhum controle, a
is,
aprovação era feita
considering
caso a
that is a
caso, junto
small
ao
city,
prefeito,
is
sim,
a
então a
reasonable
gente não
value,
tinha o menor controle de
and
qual é a
the
verba que a gente tem para isso,
but we didn't
quanto a
really
gente
have any
pode colocar,
control
quem a
of
gente
the
coloca, quem a gente
budget
não
we had,
coloca, a gente
how
só
many
seguia o
people we could
fluxo, né,
include
e
in the
era isso.
program. We would just
E a gente vê
follow
uma
the
desarticulação
flow,
entre as
and we see a
políticas, entre as outras políticas,
lack
né,
of
de desenvolvimento de
coordination
emprego e
between the
renda e
other
tudo para poder,
development and
enfim,
income
poderia ser algo
policies
que poderia
so that
fortalecer o programa. Acho que
this
é isso.
program could be
Nos resta
strengthened. I think
só
that's it.
os nossos contatos. E é
And
isso.
our
Obrigado, gente.
contact
É muito
information.
rápido,
Thank you
assim.
very much.
Foi
It's
Muito
isso.
very
obrigada.
quick,
Depois a
but
gente
that's
ainda
it.
vai ter o tempinho para debate no
Thank
final.
you very much. And we're also going to
Queria
debate
chamar
in
agora
the
a
end.
Rosane para
Now I'd like
apresentar
to
o
invite
trabalho Aluguel
Rosane
Social como
to
medida
present
de
the
reparação do
social
córrego
rent
do
as
Feijão,
a
Brumadinho, Minas Gerais.
reparation measure in
Boa
Córrego do
tarde, pessoal.
Feijão, Brumadinho,
Para
Minas Gerais.
compartilhar
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll share my
a
screen.
apresentação. Vocês estão
Can you see?
vendo?
Can you see
Se
my
você
screen?
quiser deixar em tela cheia.
Yes.
É. Bom,
Well,
pessoal, estou
Well,
trazendo aqui
what I'm bringing here is
trabalho que ainda
a
está
work that's
acontecendo, né?
still happening.
Não é modelo, não é trabalho
It's not a
pronto,
model, it's not a
mas é processo que está
concluded
dentro
work, but it's a
das
process
operações de
that
reparação do Córrego do Feijão.
is
Uma das
included
comunidades que foi
in
mais
the Córrego do
impactada pelo
Feijão
rompimento da barragem
reparation
em
actions, one of the
Brumadinho, em
areas
2019.
that was most affected when the dam broke in Brumadinho in
Esse projeto ele foi
2019.
dos primeiros a começar
This
antes
project was one of the first
de
ones
formalizar o
to
acordo
be
de
implemented
reparação
before the
judicial, que hoje está
judicial reparation
acontecendo. Então,
agreement was
foi uma
signed
das
that is
primeiras ações da
currently
Vale.
being
O Córrego
implemented.
do
So
Feijão
this
foi
was one of
uma
the
comunidade
first
altamente impactada e
actions
esse trabalho ele
by
é
the
uma
Vale company.
parceria
Córrego do
interna da
Feijão was
Vale.
a
Ele foi
highly
construído
impacted
pela
area,
área de
and
fomento
this work is
econômico,
an
que é liderado pela
internal
Flávia
partnership
Soares,
between
e
Vale,
pela área de ativos
the
imobiliários,
economic
liderada pelo Sérgio
development
Rocha. É
field,
trabalho
and
bastante extenso,
the real estate
envolve muitas
assets
equipes. Eu
department,
vou
also from Vale. It's
apresentar
an extensive work. It involves many
rapidamente esse
teams.
contexto
And I'll
para focar na questão
briefly
da
give you some
moradia e do
context
aluguel.
to focus on housing and
Opa,
rent.
não estou conseguindo passar.
I'm not being able to pass my slides.
Peraí. Consegui. Bom,
Oh,
rapidamente
I
aí o
got it.
contexto em 2019.
Well, briefly, the
2019 foi o rompimento da barragem. Nos
2019
primeiros
context
meses,
with
eles
the breaking of
aconteceram
the
muitas
dam. In the
ações
first few months, there were many
emergenciais, né?
emergency
Resgate de vítimas,
actions,
ações
rescuing
humanitárias,
of victims,
e
humanitarian
de
actions,
acolhimento da comunidade do
and
Córrego do Feijão,
to
porque
shelter the Córrego do Feijão
grande
community,
parte
because a big part of
das
the
ações de resgate, elas foram
rescuing actions were
sediadas na comunidade do Córrego do Feijão, então foi feito
headquartered in the
trabalho
Córrego do Feijão
muito
community, so
intenso aí de
there
acolhimento e
was a very
construção, né?
intensive
Acolhimento
work to
dos moradores com
shelter
apoio e
the
parceria do Instituto
inhabitants with the
Cairós, uma
support and
organização
partnership from the
social
Kairos
que
Institute,
atuava já no Córrego do
a social
Feijão. Então
organization
foi
that
feita
was
uma série de
already active in
oficinas
the Córrego do Feijão
e
region.
diálogos,
So
processo de
they did a
diálogo muito
series
grande
of
com a comunidade,
workshops
onde a
and
comunidade
dialogue with the
foi
community, where the
construindo, né,
community
com o apoio do Instituto Cairós, programa
built
de
with
necessidades,
support from the Kairos
que depois foi
Institute a demands
consolidado
program
no
that was
projeto
then
Território Parque,
consolidated into
que
the
é
Park Territory project,
basicamente de urbanização.
which
Então,
is
isso em
basically an
2019,
urbanization
esse programa de
project. And
necessidades
in
e o Master Plan do
2019,
Território Parque foi
this
validado com a
needs program
comunidade
and the
em dezembro de
Park Territory
2019,
Master Plan
e
was
aí
validated with the
2020
community in December 2019. And then
esse
in
processo de diálogo
2020,
teve que mudar
this dialogue
radicalmente em função
process
da
had to
pandemia, né? E
radically
junto
change
com
because of the
isso, se
pandemic.
iniciou um
And with
movimento
that,
de
ensued a movement of requests for compensation, people who wanted to leave the Córrego do Feijão region and that were compensated by the Vale company. Vale acquire these houses from the people based on a compensation process. And this was really intensified in 2021. And in beginning of the works of the Park Territory region, Vale was already acquiring a significant real estate stock in the community. So we can say that there were residents that were requesting urbanization to stay in the city, but there were others that were requesting compensation to leave the city. And that's how the Park Territory project was built. And in this scenario of houses that were being acquired by Vale and the emptying of the community due to the leaving of these residents. And in that context, this project, this social rent project, started to be built. And this name, by the way, was given by the community, was not a program created inside Vale. It was a program created in dialogue with the community because the community was wondering what Vale would do with the houses it was acquiring during that process. We had support from the INCT team that participated in dialogue with the community ever since the end of 2020. And it was a moment still during the COVID pandemic where we had a lot of difficulty in having in-person meetings, but we had the meetings, and that's when we traced the first scope for the project. And among the guidelines for the project, I think these are the main points that were part of the dialogue. The community was asking for the specificities of the region to be respected and that the criteria to make the real estate available was built with the community, and at the same time, the technical team involved, considering the need to think about this in an articulated manner with the housing policies of the municipality and of the state and federal policies that actually do not exist. And another point, the building of solutions that could be implemented in a swift manner that is integrated to the other demands of the community, favoring the permanence of the residents who want to stay, and especially those who were that were paying rent and who felt threatened by the change in the local dynamics.
At the same time, we had the regularization of the real estate because this is a very old settlement, and there was no regular ownership titles. So this land regulation process began. And I will have to run a little bit because I have still a very important issue to bring to you. Is this an overall vision? I'm not going to be able to talk about each initiative, but I would like to say that this intervention at Córrego do Feijão, besides the basic sanitation and the pavement and the community development and all the whole project that was built on this dialogue with the community, has other initiatives to develop the local economy, to strengthen local institutions, and the construction of a collective management process in these community spaces. And so the empty real estate that belonged to Vale were made available through what the community called the social rent. And the social rent was built in order to respond to the question posed by the inhabitants. How was Vale going to make these real estate available? And this was done through the direct participation of the community, who suggested social rent. And this is very much related to what we've seen during the week, that these real estate was going to make available, if it were through a donation or without any payment, it would it will create more conflict within the community and would change the dynamic of land valuation in this place. So the community itself started to request that these real estate units were not sold, but that this should be done in a controlled manner, and that the social rent should be the project in order to control this collective, and it would be able to enable these people to stay as they wished. These We're still in the middle of the project. It's been 6 months since the beginning of this social rent, and the resources that were collected with this rent will be passed to the community association to be used within the community initiative. So these were the agreements that were signed with the community. So in 2020 to 2022, we had this land management discussions and the use that was going to be given to the real estate by Vale. Now we are in this time that we're calling it management testing. We have a group that's managing this real estate that, together with the community, selected and designed the criteria to prioritize the families. The next steps is to consolidate the model and give it the definitive destination. And what we have as a definition in this consolidated model is that this stockpile will be managed collectively. That is, that all these real estate that represents 25% of the whole number of real estate in the Córrego do Feijão will be managed by the community. That's the model that we aim to achieve, and this is what we've been discussing throughout the week. And the most immediate path is a cooperative format, but this is being built with the community. At the present moment, we are at this stage of building these management, and that these real estate units could not be passed on individually or sold without the participation of the community. I'm almost closing my presentation, but I would like to talk about the issues that are very pertinent to what we've been discussing throughout the week. First of all, that this management model of this real estate that is nowadays in the hands of Vale, and that should be at the benefit to the community, it must be managed by these beneficiaries directly. Another great challenge is that even though today the Córrego do Feijão is going through a land regularization process, because of this, the judicial agreement, and it's an initiative by the municipality, this regularization is simply the articulation for now, considering that it's Vale who is doing this regularization. So it will not still be the land use and land occupation will not be completely regulated, and we don't know if it's going to be under the community's management yet. Also, this management model has to be economically viable in order to maintain these resources and the real estate, in order to invest them in local projects, social projects. And other one is that within the community is important for this heritage to be collective, and it's not this, there's not a conflict between collective heritage and private property, but the community needs to understand.
Concluindo, por favor, tá?
I mean, this is my last point. I'll just finish here. We must understand that this heritage must be managed collectively, and that is what we are building at the present moment. And another challenge that was put forth very interesting by Thiago Khalil this morning is that this time of listening and flexibility in building these initiatives, because you're dealing with a collective building with the community. It's not something that is imposed from the outside or pre-established rules or preconceived law. So this flexibility must be present in order to build the understanding of what is the social rent and the management model for the community to be able to directly participate with all the changes that we can foresee with the conclusion of the urbanization project that is ongoing today. So thank you very much. Sorry for exceeding my time limit, but it's a very complex experience. And I would just to conclude by saying that it is very interesting to see it as a complete landscape, and it's important to understand the control for land use of this territory that was deeply impacted and is receiving private investment and is going through a very structural change. It has his land dynamics bit frozen because the stockpile in the hands of the community, and to be careful not to launch these real estate stockpile in the market and then disrupting the economic balance of the community. Thank you very much. Thank you. We can resume the topic in the debates, but now I would like to ask Thalia to talk about the impacts and in the Natal, in the city of Natal, and the role of the rental assistance. I'll just share my screen.
Tá dando para ver, né?
Here you go. Can everyone see it? Yes. I'll start counting your time. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Thalia. I'm architect and urbanist from the University of Rio Grande do Norte, and I'm going to present the impacts and challenges of the social rental policy in the city of Natal, is focusing on the role of the rent assistance and the case of Aloysia. This is a general overview that social rental was integrated into the housing policy in 2004 and in the National Housing Plan in 2009 and aims to serve low-income families who gain up to 3 minimum salaries, and being very important to reduce the housing deficit and to recover existing real estate. And we have several challenges, and here I bring the difference between social rent and social we have the rental and local social rental and social and rental assistance, and here I present the differences because one is for low-income families and the other one is a more emergency aid. So and then the study is focused on the consequences of the loss of the housing of the household, including social impacts and economic impacts, especially focusing on small commerces and autonomous workers. And I organize on how the inhabitants organize in face of this situation.
Primeiramente, eu trouxe aqui
Uh,
sobre o
I
locus, né?
Here I've brought
A
you
comunidade Mãe Luísa, ela é uma
locus. The
raiz
community of
atual
Mãe
da cidadania
Luís
social
is a,
no
a
município de Natal,
space
que é a
of
capital do Rio
social
Grande do Norte.
interest in
Foi
Natal, the
a
capital city
primeira
of Rio
a
Grande do Norte state.
ter a sua
It was
regulamentação
the
própria,
first of these
mas
spaces to
sobre
have
a
its own
política de
regulation.
aluguel social foi
And
implementada
regarding the
depois de um
social
terremoto que
rent
aconteceu em 2014.
policies were
E eles
implemented
já
after a
determinaram de
landslide,
26
which
imóveis e afetou
affected 26
parcialmente outros
uh,
46 imóveis, forçando a
how
demissão de
real
26
estates
famílias.
and
Em
other and
2016,
partially
com as
impacted other
eleições que a gente
46,
passou em 2016,
forcing the displacement of
tiveram
26
muitas
families.
audiências com a
After
comunidade e
several
foi
hearings with the
decretado que
community,
o deslizamento
the
ocorreu por negligência do poder
it
público,
was
especialmente
decided
na
that the
drenagem urbana
landslide
e
was
na gestão
due
inadequada do
to the
território de Mãe
public
Luísa. E os
powers
moradores da comunidade
negligence,
já tinham alertado
and the
ao poder público que
community
estava tudo
inhabitants had
nesse caso, né,
already alerted
que a
the
drenagem entrava falha
the
e estava
municipality
acontecendo muita chuva no
and that
município
it was raining
e
a
mesmo
lot
assim o poder
and the
público
drainage system was
nada
not
fez.
working and the
Aí
government
agora
didn't
também
do
sobre
anything
já
about that.
a ex-mãe
So it
Luísa, né?
was
Ela
decided
assumiu
that it
lá o
was their
cargo como
fault.
diretor de Natal em
The Mãe Luísa
1994,
IASIS
mas
was
só em 1995 que
accepted in
aconteceu a
1994.
regulamentação.
However, it was only
Só
regulated
para
in
apresentar aqui
1995, and you can see
ao
here on the
lado
map
direito, Mãe
on the
Luísa é
right-hand side
a
that Mãe
comunidade que está
Luísa is this
cimento
community
de vermelho
that is here in
e
red,
os bairros do
and
entorno deles,
the
e são os bairros
neighboring
mais caros de Natal, né? Os
areas
bairros que têm
that
o
are
médio
the
valores mais
most
caros de Natal.
expensive
Entre eles, Areia
neighborhoods
Preta,
of the city of
Petrópolis e
Natal.
Tirol.
You have here
Mãe Luísa,
Areia Preta, Petrópolis,
geograficamente,
and Tirol.
está
And
dentro de
Mãe
um morro
Luísa is geographically on a
e o seu
mount,
território é
and its
extremamente de
territory
extremo interesse do mercado imobiliário, porque
is
tem um
extremely
fluxo de
interesting
verba
for
por
the
lá
real estate market
e está próximo aos
because you
bairros
have
com
a
o
direct
metro
access
quadrado
and it's
mais
very
caro da
close to
cidade, né?
those neighborhoods with
Onde
the
foi
highest
circulado
value per
em
square meter.
rosa, não sei
Here
se
in
vocês
pink,
vão estar
I think
conseguindo ver,
you can
foi
see,
onde ocorreu o
was
deslizamento
where the landslide
de terra
occurred.
e mais no deslizamento foi construído
And
uma escadaria
there,
nessa
in the place
planície
of
principal local
the landslide, a
consertar
staircase
aquele monte de
was
terra que
built
tinha
in order to
sido
repurpose what had happened
deslizado. A
and
escadaria
to
é
recover the
belíssima,
area.
ela
It's a
foi
very pretty,
construída tudo
uh,
pelos moradores,
so very pretty steps, and
com
that
várias
were built
artes e
by the
grafites
inhabitants with graffiti and
e a assinatura dos
artworks
próprios moradores.
and with their own signatures as well.
A regulamentação da
The
ex-Mãe Luísa foi
regulation of
muito
ACE
importante para
Mãe
garantir
Luísa was
a
very
moradia,
important
o
to
ordenamento do
ensure
uso do
the
solo,
right
onde Mãe
to
Luísa joga o
housing
solo dela
and
para
the
a
land
comunidade.
use.
Aí sobre o deslizamento, né?
About
Essas
the
são
landslide.
imagens do
These are
deslizamento que
pictures
aconteceu
of
em Mãe Luísa.
the tragedy that
Aconteceu na
happened.
rua Guanabara,
It was
como
at
eu falei,
the
Mãe Luísa
Guanabara
é
Street.
no morro, então
And like I
onde
said, it's on Mãe
deslizou
Luísa
vários
is
quando a
located on
terra
a
era palha.
mount.
E essa imagem,
So this picture
no
here is
canto
a
superior
picture.
direito, seria
On
a
the
escadaria de Mãe
right-hand
Luísa, que foi
side
construída
are the
onde
steps that were
ocorreu o
built
deslizamento.
where the
Sobre as
landslide had
famílias,
happened.
algumas
About the
famílias foram
families,
realocadas
some of them
para
were
o conjunto
resettled
habitacional do programa Minha Casa Minha
in
Vida,
Minha Casa
no
Minha
Leningrado,
Vida
que é uma comunidade
project
do
in the
bairro Guarapes, na
community of
região oeste do
Leningrado in the
município.
neighborhood of Guararapes
Não foi bem
in the
aceito
west part of the municipality, and that was
pelas
not
vítimas
well
do
accepted
deslizamento,
by the
porque
victims of the landslide
o bairro de Guarapes é
because
um
the
bairro muito longe
Guararapes
de onde é o bairro de
neighborhood
Mãe
is
Luísa. O bairro de Mãe
very
Luísa
far
também é
away
extremamente
from Mãe
democratizado aqui na
Luísa,
cidade de
which
Natal.
is
E
very
o bairro
well
de Guarapes,
located
além de ser
within the
uma
city. But
metropolitana,
Guarapes
não tinha
is in
a mesma
another
infraestrutura que
metropolitan
o bairro de
area
Mãe Luísa
and did
tinha.
not count on the same infrastructure
Mas
as
o
Mãe
programa
Luísa.
de aluguel social foi
However,
criado
the
para as famílias
social
que não
rental
foram
program
realocadas.
was created
Inicialmente,
for
para
those
vocês terem
families that were
noção,
not
o salário
displaced,
mínimo para a
and they
locação de
received
imóveis
a
foi
minimum wage
calculado
to
dentro do
rent
próprio bairro de Mãe
real
Luísa.
estate within the neighborhood of
Me
Mãe
choca um
Luísa.
pouco também saber que no Rio de Janeiro eram
It's a bit
R$ 700
shocking that in Rio de Janeiro
e
we're talking about
em Sobral
only
era 750.
reais, and Sobral was 450 reais. But fortunately, here in Mãe Luísa, families received one minimum salary because prices were really high for
também
rent.
eram altos do próprio mercado privado
Because then that was a private market. It was working within the Mãe Luísa neighborhood and had very high prices for rent. So this gave them a temporary solution until those families were able to resettle in their own houses or in houses that were provided by the municipality. However, the situation was not solved very quickly. The building was only delivered to inhabitants 10 years after the landslide. And here I have some quotes by the inhabitants. And I would like to highlight that the climate disaster, like a landslide, people lose more than just their houses, but also their jobs and their social relationships that had been already established in that place. Here I brought some words by WC. He said that after 10 years of their moving, the changes were felt psychologically. They also lost all their assets. He lost his house and his shop and his studio, his photograph studio, that even when he received a new house by the municipality, it wasn't the same thing because he wouldn't receive his photograph studio nor his shop back. And he decided to move to another city. But when debates were resumed in Natal, he came back in order to endorse his neighbors and help with the judicial processes and suits. And as you can see here on the left-hand side, Mãe Luísa is a community with a strong history and social struggles. And even though it took them 10 years, the community never stopped fighting for their rights due to the disaster of the landslide. And here's a picture of a meeting with the public prosecutor's office where they were stating that the landslide only happened because of the negligence by the public powers and the government. Here's another inhabitant. MB talks about how his family and nephews were playing that day when it started to rain, and someone yelled and said, "The ground is opening and at our feet," and they started running so that they wouldn't be taken by this landslide. And he says that when only one house falls, so everyone helps you. But when all our houses are falling in the landslide, who will help you? No, he received this assistance of one minimum salary, and they also had the help of the community. The community is very well articulated, as I said, and he has rental houses and he has a shop, a small market, and that was also lost with the landslide.
And only in 2021, the municipal law for eventual social assistance benefits were sanctioned. However, this law transferred the responsibility for payment from another secretariat to the municipal labor secretariat and social assistance, and the benefit was reduced in 50%. So at the time, they started getting 600 reais as a benefit, and this was very publicized at the time because people said they couldn't uh, maintain their basic needs with only 600 reais. So the families that already faced financial difficulties because they lost their housing, their workspace, started facing additional difficulties because of the cuts in the benefit. And like I said, in May 2024, only 10 years after the disaster, the Natal local government delivered the Mãe Luísa residential complex, a condominium that was supposed to house
no
the
canto
victims of
direito
the
da tela.
disaster, which is
Eu trabalhei na
shown here
Secretaria
in
de
the right
Habitação
side of the
e eu
screen.
posso dizer
I
que o
worked in
projeto
the housing secretariat,
desse
and I can say
condomínio
that
já estava
the
feito há
project for this
muito tempo,
condominium
antes de ele ser
was
novo.
Se você
ready.
puder ir concluindo, por favor, tá bom?
If you could please
Obrigada.
conclude. Thank you.
Antes dele ter sido entregue, o
The project for
projeto
this housing
já estava pronto há
complex
muito tempo e
was,
o que demorou foi
it already
realmente o
existed
trâmite da
for a long
Prefeitura
time,
de
and
licitação e de
what
colocar o
took
projeto para
very
ser
long was the
construído.
bureaucracy in the local government and
Agora, bem
the
rápido, o projeto ele
permits
foi entregue
for
sem
the project.
luz
And the
e sem
project
água.
was
E
delivered
quando ele foi
without
entregue, apenas
access
3 famílias
to
começaram a morar
electricity or
no
water, and when
condomínio
it was delivered, only 3
e
families
todas elas
lived in the
falaram que
condominium, and
era
all
muito
of them
difícil
said
morar
it
lá
was very
porque
hard
não
to
tinha
live
luz,
there
não tinha
because there
água.
was no electricity and no
E
water.
eu peguei esse relato de CB que diz
And
que
I
mesmo assim
took
resolveu se
this
mudar para o
testimony
condomínio
from
e que
CB,
na época do
who said that
deslizamento ele
even
perdeu, além da sua casa, ele
then
também perdeu
they
seu
chose
carro,
to
que era sua
live
ferramenta de trabalho,
in
porque ele
the
fazia serviço
condominium, and
de
that in
propaganda.
addition
Então, o
to
fato
losing their house, they also lost their car,
do
which was
residencial ter sido
their
entregue sem luz,
the
sem água, com
his
infiltrações
main work tool because
no primeiro
he
mês
used the car to
de entrega, deu várias
run
notícias de
ads. And in
jornal.
the first month of
E eu
delivery of the
gostaria de também
condominium,
agora, realmente concluindo,
this
dizer
was
que a
very
política de
publicized.
aluguel
And to
social,
conclude, I'd like
ela
to
não
say that the
deve
social
abranger
rent
só
policy should
a
not
moradia
only
temporária,
encompass
mas também ela deve
temporary
prever uma forma de
housing,
recuperação
but it should
econômica das
also
famílias, com
provide
foco
for
na
the economic
revitalização de
recovery of the
negócios
families,
locais e
focusing
na
on the
reintegração dos trabalhadores ao
revitalization of
mercado.
local businesses and the
É,
reintegration of
Poderia ser, por
workers to
exemplo,
the
programas de
market. For
capacitação
example,
profissional, de microcréditos, e com
professional
certeza
capacity
deveria
building
ter
programs,
apoio
microcredit programs,
psicossocial.
and definitely should
E
also
também incentivos
offer
para a construção de
psychosocial
pequenos
support and
negócios.
also
E agora,
incentives
realmente, para
for the building
finalizar,
of
eu
small
gostaria
businesses.
de dizer
And I
que
would also like
a
to
comunidade
say
Mãe
that
Luísa é uma comunidade muito
the
forte,
Mãe Luísa
porque
community is a
eles
very
são alvo
strong community
constante
because
de
they are
especulação
constant
imobiliária,
targets
passam
of real estate
por problemas
speculation, and
que
they
muitas vezes
go
nem
through
cabem a eles,
issues
como um
that
desastre
are
natural que poderia
often
ter sido
not even up to them, like a
evitado se o
natural
poder
disaster
público
that
não
could have been
tivesse
avoided if the
negligenciado,
public power
mas mesmo
had
assim é
not
uma
neglected
comunidade
them. But even
que
so,
faz um
it's a
trabalho
community that does
muito bonito no município de Natal
beautiful work in the
e,
municipality of Natal,
e que resiste muito à
and
luta
that
contra a especulação
and they really
imobiliária.
resist
Então,
and
eu
fight against
finalizo
real
aqui a minha
estate
fala
speculation.
e
So
peço
I would
perdão
like to conclude and
pela
also
demora.
apologize because I went
Obrigada.
over my
Obrigada,
time.
Thalia.
Thank you. Thank
Eu
you,
vou chamar
Tanya.
agora a Larissa,
I will
que também está
now invite
representando a Fabiola
Larice.
Xavier
She's also
Rocha Ferreira
representing
Lima
Fabiola
e a Carlos
Xavier
Manuela
Rocha
Hora,
Ferreira Lima
que vai
and
apresentar o
Carlos
trabalho
Manuela
Desafios e
Hora,
Perspectivas da
and she
Política
will present
Habitacional em Goiás,
the work
Análise da Região
challenges and
Metropolitana de
perspectives of the
Goiânia e a
housing
questão do aluguel
policy in
social.
Goiás, analysis of the Goiânia metropolitan region, and social
Boa
rent.
tarde, tudo bem? Vocês estão me
Good
ouvindo?
afternoon. Can you hear me?
Perfeito.
Yes,
Perfeito.
perfectly.
Obrigada, Beatriz.
Great.
Meu
Thank
nome é
you,
Larice,
Beatriz.
eu sou
My name is
arquiteta,
Larice.
eu
I'm an
sou
architect,
mestranda pelo programa
and
da
I'm a master's
LabCidade
student
na
in
UFG
the
e nós
cities
desenvolvemos essa
project at
pesquisa
the
no âmbito de
Federal
uma das
University of
disciplinas.
Goiânia, and we developed this
A
research in one
pesquisa
of the disciplines of the course.
tem como objetivo
And the research
entender a
had as a
situação
goal to
habitacional da
understand
região
the housing
metropolitana de
situation in
Goiânia
the metropolitan
e
region of
analisar
Goiânia and analyze
a questão do aluguel
the
social como uma possível
issue of
alternativa para a
social rent
situação
as
de
a possible
vulnerabilidade
alternative
habitacional.
for the
E aí,
housing
para a
vulnerability
gente
situation.
entender isso, a gente vai
And in order for
discutir
us to
o
understand
direito à
this, we
moradia
will be
adequada,
discussing
fazer
the
um breve
right to
histórico dos
appropriate
programas sociais
housing,
dos programas
give a brief
habitacionais
overview
do
of the
estado de
housing
Goiás,
programs
entender
in the state of
como o
Goiás,
composto
to
déficit
understand how
habitacional, né, quem são
the
essas
housing
pessoas,
deficit is
entender a
composed, who
situação
are these
habitacional da
people,
região metropolitana de
understand the housing
Goiânia
situation
e o
in the
programa
metropolitan
de
region
aluguel
of
social,
Goiânia,
auxílio para
and the
ter onde morar,
social
do governo do
rent and
estado.
social aid
Então,
program by the
entender
government of the
primeiro,
state.
partir da premissa
So
de que o acesso
first,
à
we start with the
moradia
premise that access to
adequada é um
housing, to
direito,
appropriate
né, um
housing,
direito
is a right.
estabelecido no Brasil a
It's
partir
a
da
right
Constituição de
established in
88, no
Brazil
artigo
in the
6, um direito
1988
social,
Constitution,
e
Article
que
6. It's a
não é
social
apenas a
right.
moradia, ela precisa ser
And
uma
that is not
moradia
just housing,
adequada,
it
que ela é
needs to be
segura e
appropriate
saudável,
housing
que
that's
ela
safe and
garanta o
healthy
direito à
and
segurança de
that
posse, à
guarantees
acessibilidade a essa moradia,
ownership and
e essa
accessibility
moradia também precisa ter
and
disponibilidade de
security
serviços
and that there also needs to be availability of services, infrastructure, and minimum construction quality. And access to housing fosters socioeconomic promotion and diminishes inequality in a society. Based on that, we investigate what is the evolution of the housing policies in the state. So, with the collapse of the BNH, which was a wide an expensive policy in the 60s and 70s in Brazil, the states and municipalities start uh, doing local policies, and that's what happened in Goiás as well. And the program in the state that had the biggest reach were the housing the mutirões da moradia programs, where together with civil society, the government, and the residents would build the houses. And starting in the 2000s, with the perspective of social assistance, these programs start changing, and we have the Cheque Moradia and Renda Cidadão programs. Starting in 2003 with the creation of the Ministry of Cities, the National Social Interest Housing Program, Goiás adheres to these programs, and in addition to local programs, Goiás is also part of the Minha Casa Minha Vida program. Goiás is Goiânia is the capital of the state of Goiás, and it was the second biggest region with populational growth between 2010 and 2022, where the urban mesh, this gray area, meets the urban mesh of the neighboring cities. We see a high rate of growth. It is composed by 2.6 million inhabitants, 36% of the state's population, and this growth, which is an economic pole of the central region of Brazil, but the economic growth does not reflect in social and human development growth. In the same way for all cities, we see that the city of Goiânia has a social development index that is higher than the other periphery cities. And that growth impacts directly in the infrastructure of the cities, and it creates a growing demand for housing, creating a housing deficit. And how is this housing deficit understood right now? Who are these people? The João Pinheiro Foundation divides them in three main groups. The ones that, in addition to the lack of housing, we also have houses that don't meet the minimum condition to be considered appropriate or dignified. So the housing is divided into precarious cohabitation and excessive rent burden. The precarious are improvised and rustic. Cohabitation is cohabitation in rooms and family cohabitation. And excessive rent burden are those families that have their incomes of up to 3 minimum wages and spend over 30% of that income with rent. Here in the state of Goiás, 209,000 municipalities are in a housing deficit situation. Out of these, 77,000 municipalities are in the Goiânia metropolitan region. 15% of the residencies of the houses in the metropolitan region of Goiânia are considered as inappropriate. And how is this deficit divided? 79% of these people are in excessive rent burden. These are people who have their income below 3 minimum wages and they spend over 30% of their income with rent. And this makes these people more even more vulnerable because it prevents them from accessing other basic social rights like nutrition and transportation. The state of Goiás has for these people a program that is called Para Ter Onde Morar, which offers, quote unquote, offers 350 reais a month for a maximum period of 18 months. Currently, we have 5,000 beneficiaries in that program. Out of these, 735 are in the metropolitan region of Goiânia, and we have a line with 10,000 families that are waiting for the benefit.
No extremo
5
dessa
minutos, Larissa.
situação. 5 minutos. Obrigada,
5
Beatriz.
minutes. Okay, thank you,
No
Beatriz.
extremo dessa
In the
situação de vulnerabilidade, nós
extreme
temos as ocupações
part of
aqui da
this
região
vulnerability
metropolitana.
situation, we have the
E,
occupations here
para
in the
piorar as
metropolitan
ocupações, nós
region.
temos as remoções
And
forçadas.
we
Aqui,
also
como
have
exemplo, eu vou citar
forced
a Operação
removals. And
Beira-Mar,
as
na
an
cidade de
example, I
Aparecida de
will
Goiânia, que
mention the
em
Beira-Mar
2021 foi
operation in the
retirado à
city of
força.
Aparecida de Goiânia,
56 famílias foram
where
removidas. A partir
56
dessa
families were
remoção,
forcibly
começou o
removed in
movimento
2021. And based on that removal,
despejo zero no período da pandemia.
ensued
E a
a
gente percebe que
zero
a
eviction
especulação
movement
imobiliária,
during the
ela
pandemic. And we see that real
aqui na
estate
região
speculation here in the region,
cria
it
dinâmicas muito
creates
diferentes na cidade.
very different
Então, ela
dynamics
molda os
in the
espaços
city. So it
de
molds the
onde
spaces
a
where
injustiça social ela é muito visível. E a
social
gente
injustice is very
precisa
visible.
que as políticas habitacionais
And we
tenham
need
foco na
housing
inclusão.
policies to focus on inclusion.
Então,
So
para finalizar,
to
eu
conclude,
que a pesquisa coloca
the
como o aluguel
research
social uma alternativa para
shows
essas
social
pessoas em
rent as
situação
an
de
alternative
vulnerabilidade
for
extrema,
these people in
mas que ele
extreme
precisa
vulnerability,
ter
but that it
alcance,
needs
né?
to
Ele
have
precisa estar mais alinhado a essa
reach and
demanda
it needs to
existente
be more aligned to the
e
existing demand.
entender o prazo para que realmente essas pessoas
And we
não
need to
não vivam
understand
num
the
ciclo de
appropriate
exclusão,
deadlines so that
onde
these
hoje eu
people
tenho
are
o
not inserted
auxílio
in
e
an
logo em
exclusion
seguida, antes de que
cycle
eu
where currently
possa
I have an aid
restabelecer, esse
and
auxílio
then
não existe mais.
before I can
Então,
get
a
back on my
gente
feet, I lose that
colocou
aid.
como os possíveis benefícios, né, dessa
So
política.
we
Aliviar o
listed as
peso do
possible
aluguel sobre as
benefits
demais
for the policy
necessidades
to
básicas,
alleviate the
facilitar a
burden of
permanência
rent,
dessas famílias em
facilitate
áreas que
the
já têm uma
permanence of these
infraestrutura
families in
e
areas that
serviços
already have
adequados. E o
infrastructure
grande
and appropriate
desafio, como eu
services.
tinha
And the
comentado,
main
é que essa
challenge,
política
like
de
I had
aluguel
mentioned,
social, ela não
is
pode
that the
estar
social
sozinha, ela
rent
precisa
policy cannot
estar
stand on its
alinhada e
own. It
coordenada
needs
com
to be
outras
aligned
políticas
and
habitacionais
coordinated
mais
with
robustas
other
e com
more
planejamento
robust
urbano
housing
eficaz,
policies
capaz
and with
de
efficient urban planning
tentar regular o
that is
mercado
that
para inverter
can
essa lógica
regulate the market
habitacional
to
na
reverse
região
this housing
metropolitana de
logic
Goiânia.
in the metropolitan region
É isso,
of
muito
Goiânia.
obrigada.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, Larissa.
Thank you very much,
Eu queria
Ladice.
convidar agora
And
a
I'd like
professora
to
Isadora
ask
Guerreiro para
Professor
debater as
Isadora
apresentações.
Guerreiro to
Acho que a gente
debate
costuma
the
falar de mais ou menos
presentations.
12
I think
minutos, e aí, com o
she
que sobrar, a gente
she has
divide uma
about 12
resposta
minutes
entre vocês, tá
to
bom?
make her
Um tempo de
comments,
resposta.
and with
Obrigada,
the
gente.
remaining time, we will do the debate.
Obrigada,
Thank you.
Beatriz, e todo
Thank
mundo
you,
que apresentou
Beatriz, and
aqui.
everyone who
Agradeço
gave their
muito à organização do
presentation.
seminário
And
pelo
thank you
convite
to
para
the
fazer esse
seminar's
debate.
organizers
É um tema
for
muito
inviting
caro a
me
mim,
for this
porque
debate.
ele
This
foi
topic is very
objeto
dear to me
do meu
because it has been
pós-doutorado.
object of my
Então,
postdoc
tem algumas coisas
research.
sobre ele e algum pensamento já
And
consolidado. E foi muito interessante, porque
it was
da
very
primeira vez
interesting
que eu apresentei esse tema num seminário,
because
foi
the
até
first time
estranho,
I
porque
introduced
as
this
pessoas
topic
não
in a
entendiam
seminar,
o
it
que eu
was
estava
weird because
falando,
people didn't really
porque era um
understand
tema
what I
que
was
não
talking
era
about
assunto de
because it was
nenhuma
a topic
pesquisa.
that was not the topic of any
Assim, a gente
research.
recebeu agora para esse
And
seminário muitos
in
trabalhos,
the
né, Paulo?
seminar, we received many
E a gente
articles, right,
selecionou só
Paula?
alguns para estar
And we
aqui. Então,
selected only a few to be here.
eu comecei
And
meu pós-doc no final de 2018,
I
então a primeira
started
apresentação foi em
my
2019,
postdoc
ou
in the end
seja,
of
5 anos
2018. So my
atrás não
first
existia
presentation
pesquisa
was
sobre auxílio
2019.
aluguel,
So
né? Eu
5
estava
years ago,
começando a
there
falar
was no
sobre
research
isso,
about
e 5 anos depois a gente tem
social
muitos
rent.
trabalhos sendo
And 5
apresentados,
years
né? É
later, we
curioso
have a
que
lot
a
of work
Luciana Ximenes
being
mostrou aqui
a lot of works
que
being
mais da metade
presented.
dos
These
municípios
numbers that
brasileiros já
Luciana
têm
Ximenes
auxílio
just shown, that over
aluguel, as
half
grandes
Brazilian
metrópoles,
municipalities
né?
already have
80% das
social
cidades com mais
rent.
de 500 mil
The
habitantes têm a política. E
the
naquele
bigger
momento que eu
cities
estava assim,
have
eu ficava
that policy.
olhando a cidade da
And at the
grande São
time,
Paulo para
I
ver
looked
quais tinham,
at
quais
the
não tinham.
cities
Hoje em dia é uma
in São
política
Paulo
generalizada.
to
Então, isso
find
demonstra
out
alguma coisa para a
which ones
gente, né?
had
Então, achei muito
social rent,
interessante.
and
Os
currently
trabalhos
it's a
são muito
more
diversos
disseminated
aqui
policy.
entre vocês. Vários
So
deles mostram questões
this is very interesting to
que
see. The
são
works you
reiterados
have presented
problemas do
are
auxílio
very
aluguel. Eu
diverse.
vou comentar
Many
alguns
of
deles
them
aqui que vocês
show
chamaram a atenção. Eu vou
problems
fazer
that
algumas
are
perguntas para
problems that
vocês,
are
porque eu acho que é
intrinsic
isso.
to social rent,
Como
and
agora ele
I'll ask
virou
you some
uma
questions about
política
this, because since this has
disseminada,
become a
né? E eu acho
disseminated
que é importante a gente
policy,
pensar sobre isso
I think it's
primeiramente. Eu queria
important for us
deixar
to
isso
think
como
about
questão
it.
para todo mundo da
And
mesa,
first,
assim, da
I'd
gente
like
pensar,
to
para
leave
além dos
this
nossos
as
casos específicos e
an
como eles
issue for
funcionam, os
all
motivos, os
in the
critérios e tudo
table,
mais,
beyond the
é,
specific cases that we
algo
work with.
aconteceu nos últimos
Something
5 anos
happened
que fez com que
in
uma
the last
política
5 years that caused a
muito
policy that
desregulada no
is
sentido de
very
que é o dinheiro
unregulated,
colocado na
in
mão
the
das
sense that it is
pessoas e que não se
money that
sabe,
is
né,
given
para
to
onde elas vão.
people,
Acho que
and
isso,
we don't
para
know
cada
what they use
cidade,
it
isso é um
for.
pouco diferente. Tem
And in
cidades
each city, this may
mais
be
desreguladas
different.
e
There
cidades
are
mais
more or
reguladas, né?
less
A gente sabe que
regulated
tem algumas grandes
cities.
cidades que têm programas um pouco mais
We know
regulados,
some
como
big
Belo
cities
Horizonte, por
have
exemplo.
more regulated
Mas
programs,
é
like
uma
Belo Horizonte,
política
for
que
example,
parece uma
but it is a
política, como
policy
eu
that
colocava lá há
seems,
alguns anos atrás,
like
essa
I
política
said
de
a few years
gestão
back,
de uma
it
população,
is a policy for the
seja de
management
removidos,
of
como
a
a Luciana
population,
colocou aqui para
either a
gente,
population of people who have been
por obras,
removed, like
mas
Luciana
cada
said,
vez mais
because
por
of
conta de
construction
remoções,
work,
por ou
but more and
desastres já
more because
acontecidos
of
ou por áreas de
removals
risco,
due
que o
to
desastre ainda não
disasters,
aconteceu, mas está prestes a
climate
acontecer,
disasters, or
né?
risk, or people who live in risk areas
E
that are very prone to disaster.
basicamente junto com uma política habitacional
And
que não dá
basically
conta,
together with
né?
a
Uma
housing
política que a gente teve,
policy
uma
that
política
is not
com Minha Casa
enough.
Minha Vida e
A
mesmo o
policy that
PAC,
we
né?
had, a policy
Políticas
like
muito
Minha Casa
grandes,
Minha
com
Vida,
muito
and
investimento,
even the
e mesmo
PAC,
assim a gente
huge
vê que o
policies
que
with a
cresce no
lot of
déficit habitacional
investment.
é o
And
ônus
what we
excessivo de
see
aluguel, e
is
portanto a gente
that
tem, como
what's
a Larissa
growing
estava mostrando
in the
aqui
housing deficit
para
is the
Goiânia,
excessive
mas a gente vê
burden
isso em
of
todas as
rent,
cidades
like
brasileiras, né?
Larissa has shown for
A
Goiânia,
dinâmica
but we see
imobiliária
this in
crescendo
all
muito
Brazilian
junto com os
cities,
programas
the real
habitacionais, e
estate
portanto a coisa
dynamic really
não
growing
vai
with
dando
the
conta,
housing
e a gente tem
programs.
sempre esse
And
deslocamento
we
entre
always
as
have
políticas
this
habitacionais que vão dar
problem
a solução definitiva e
between
uma
the housing
população que está
policies
sempre
that give a
sendo
definitive solution
gerida porque ela
and a
não tem
population
onde
which is
ficar,
always
e
being
portanto a gente
managed
está
because they
convivendo
have
cada vez
nowhere to
mais com
go.
um contexto
So we are more and
de
more
cidades em que
coexisting
a gente
in a
tem uma
context of
população
cities
em
where we have
insegurança
a
habitacional
population
permanente,
in
ela não é mais
permanent housing
aquela
insecurity.
segurança
It is
temporária que
no
daqui a pouco eu
longer
vou ter a minha
temporary
casa. Vocês estão mostrando
insecurity and
que
soon I'll have my own
até
house.
nas menores
You're
cidades
showing that
tempo é
even
10
in
anos pelo
smaller
menos até
cities,
se chegar a
it takes
alguma
at least
solução. Aqui
10
em São Paulo não é
years
nem 10
for us
anos,
to
posso dizer para
reach
vocês
any
que
type of
é muito
solution.
mais do
And
que isso,
here
que as
in São
pessoas ficam
Paulo, it can be
nocionando,
much more.
né? Então,
So
a gente está vivendo nesses
we are
últimos anos
living
todos, eu
in the
acho que
last couple of years.
a possibilidade de ter essa
I
política
think the possibility of
de
having
auxílio,
this
ela indica
po-
que a gente está num contexto
policy
habitacional de uma
of
insegurança muito grande.
social
Eu queria
rent
deixar algumas
points
perguntas
to
para
the fact
cada um
that
de
we are
vocês
in
no
a housing
tempinho aqui
context that is
que me
of
resta,
much insecurity.
né? Que eu
And I
fiquei,
wanted
que
to
eu queria
leave you with some
comentar
questions in
e
the time
colocar
I have
algumas
left.
questões. Para a
Um,
Luciana, sobre o
for
Rio de Janeiro,
Luciana,
a gente já
about Rio de
conversa sobre esse
Janeiro,
caso há algum tempo,
we have
né,
been talking
Luciana?
about
Então,
this
assim,
case for a while,
concordo
right,
muito com a
Luciana?
sua
So I really
hipótese, né? A
agree
relação entre
with your
remoções
hypothesis
e
and the
auxílio aluguel. Eu
relationship
acho que de
between
todas as apresentações
removals
aqui é
and
que ficou
rent
mais claro
aid.
isso. Eu acho que é
And
o
from
caso
all of
das
the
grandes metrópoles
presentations,
brasileiras, no qual o auxílio aluguel
yours
está
shown
muito
that very
colado
clear.
a uma
And it's
política
a
de
case of the
remoções
big Brazilian
em massa, não
metropolises.
é pouca coisa, né?
Social
São
rent
remoções
is
em massa, e o Rio de
very
Janeiro
connected
mostra
to a
isso.
mass removal
E
policy, and
aí
Rio de Janeiro shows this.
me deixou encucada, e aí eu queria te perguntar
And
sobre
that
o seu
left
gráfico,
me thinking. I would
esses
like to
gráficos
ask
que você
about the
mostrou,
graphics that you
eles
showed, the
mostram
charts, because they
parece
show,
isso que eu queria
or
conversar com você, uma certa
uh,
diminuição
they show
desde
a
2011,
reduction
né,
since
10 ou 11 para 2000, que
2011,
também foi o caso aqui de
with
São Paulo, que a gente
2010 to
estava,
2011
né,
being
num
the
momento
peak years, and here in
de
São
pico de
Paulo as
política de
well.
regularização e de
It was
remoção
the
muito
peak
grande. 2011,
years of
2013, então
public policies
bem parecidos nossos
from
dois
2010
casos.
to
Só
2013.
que no
So
caso
both
do Rio
states
tem
are very
uma
similar in
diminuição
that
desse
sense. But after
então.
that, we see see a reduction from then on. And I would like you to talk a little bit about that. Does that mean that the policy is being thought to end or not? Does that mean less removals than at that time? Can you say about this dynamics of reduction? Lucas Lessa and Luana about Sobral, I did not understand from where did the need for this policy come from? Because I understand that it was a very different policy than from Rio de Janeiro and more linked to social assistance. We had that here in São Paulo, but it was removed from the law at the time because it was a non-criteria. Because if everyone who was in need and needed would receive a rental aid, then everybody would have to receive that. So I would like you to talk about it a little bit more, because the discussion here in São Paulo, and I believe that in other cities as well, is to think the rental assistance as social assistance policy and not a housing policy. I mean, or the other way around, is that you are solving one of the problems of that family, but you don't see the other dynamics. You're not looking at the housing dynamics, for example, the increase in rent. You're not looking at the problem from the point of view of housing and only of other social issues. And also what we see in São Paulo is the gender issue, the issue of women, and the housing deficit already shows that it's mainly feminine, and especially in these years when you have these profiles of housing deficit. Each of them has different issues, but rent specifically, it has the feminine issue, like with single mothers or Black women are they they tend to go to rent and not to precarious housing. And here in São Paulo, we have a specific policy to assist women under domestic violence. And I think this is an issue that we should think about more. And so this is, again, to serve the vulnerability and not only the housing problem. Of course, for a woman in this situation, of course, receiving assistance is very important, but she needs assistance in other social areas. Otherwise, they won't solve even that specific problem. About Brumadinho, Rosane, it is a very interesting case. I didn't have any information on that specific policy from Vale in Brumadinho, and gave me a lot of food for thought that I would like to share with you. Because we have the specific issue of Brumadinho and the challenges, and I thought, how will that continue and survive in time without the Vale? This management of this process by the families, the management of the stockpile of real estate, and that has to be seen not only from the point of view of the systems, but everything that is being doing. And we have to think what will happen when the Vale leaves the project. Is there a debate about housing with the municipality? And what other measures are being thought? And I would like you to talk about that a little further. And also the fact that the rent and this stockpile of rent and that is being managed by the community may be a model for other larger cities. Because if you say that 25% of the stockpile is controlled, then basically it's the whole town is being controlled, because the market is also controlling the rest of the market. And that might be maybe thought for other cities. For us to see the difference between a controlled rent and one that is
Quando a gente pensa em auxílio
in the
aluguel,
family's hands and
tem que
that
pensar,
deregulates the whole
se,
market
por exemplo,
in
o
that
auxílio
sense.
aluguel Nova
We can
York, por
think
exemplo,
about the
né?
New
Ele só
York
pode ser usado em
um,
determinados
rent
lugares já
assistance, for
pré-estabelecidos,
example. It
onde
can
as
only
pessoas,
be used
onde
in
as casas
specific
estão
places or by specific
já
people
cadastradas,
where
né?
the houses
Então, não
have
é uma
already
coisa
been
que
registered.
altera o mercado
So
local.
it's
Então, isso
something
está
that does
mostrando
not
que
change the local
esse
market. And you
controle do
show
aluguel
that
ele
this
não precisa ser
control,
regulado, ele pode
that rent
justamente
does
ser um
not
instrumento de
have to be
regulação.
unregulated. On
E
the
eu acho que isso
other,
é interessante a
it's
gente
the
pensar,
opposite. It
inclusive
can be
nessas
used as
cidades.
a
Quer dizer,
tool
o
for
auxílio aluguel de São
regulation.
Paulo, que hoje são
For
22 mil
example,
famílias
in São
atualmente,
Paulo, we have
né? Ou seja, já chegou a mais de
22,000
30 mil
families
famílias.
today
Se
with
fosse
receiving
controlado por um
rental assistance.
conselho
What if
de
this was
moradores
controlled by a
que,
council
que vão pensar
of
formas
the
desse aluguel
community of
ser
inhabitants that
mais
could think
bem
about this rent being
gerido, né?
better
Formas de
managed?
controle comunitário, com a participação de movimentos
Community
sociais, enfim. Acho
controls
que você
with
coloca
direct
várias questões importantes
participation of
para a gente
social
pensar e mostra
movements and
como que as
associations.
outras experiências
We
estão
can think about this, and it
muito
shows how other
desreguladas, né?
experiences are,
O
in
caso de
all other cases
Natal,
are so unregulated.
o
In the
caso de
case of
Natal é
Natal,
muito interessante pelo fato dele
it
ser
is very
articulado
interesting because it
com
is
uma antiga lei,
articulated
né? Ou
with these
uma lei que
A's,
você falou, né?
these
Tá aí.
specific areas.
E uma coisa que eu achei interessante seria ver se
And it is
articulasse algo parecido
interesting
com o
to
que a
see
Rosane apresentou,
if something similar
tendo
to
uma
what Rosane
comunidade
participated as a
delimitada,
community
com
that is
poucas famílias, né? Porque
really
são
with
26
very
famílias.
few families
Quer dizer, isso
in a
poderia
limited
ter sido
area,
pensado de
if that
forma um
could have
pouco
been
mais
thought
controlada, né?
in a more
Entre os
controlled way
berçários, algum lugar
within
específico onde
that
todas as
neighborhood,
famílias
that
vão e elas
ACE
controlam o preço das
community,
reservas, né? Quer
how
dizer,
they
mas
can
não é assim que pode ser
control
feito. Quer dizer, como
if
que
they
as
could
prefeituras
control the
da
rent
política
and
de
that,
auxílio
but that's
aluguel
not how it's been
armazém com
done.
que
So
essas
if we
famílias
could
estão sendo
align
resolvidas,
those
isso já é
policies
um
with the
instrumento
families
interessante para
that are
pensar
being displaced
como
within the
forma de dar
A's,
pequena
that's
regulação em
something we
outras
can think
cidades, né?
about, maybe like a
Articular o
small
aluguel com
articulation in
conselhos
other
de venda.
cities to
Isso é uma coisa que
articulate those
poderia ser
council,
feita e a gente
community
sabe o
councils
caso, né?
and the
E no
other
caso de Goiânia, estou
associations.
acabando aqui.
In the case of Goiânia,
E o caso aqui de Goiânia, é, eu não entendi,
I did
Larice,
not understand.
qual é o critério de atendimento.
That is the
Se tem a ver mais com a
criteria
questão da
to be a
vulnerabilidade ou
beneficiary, if
se
it's
tem
more
mais a
related to
ver com a questão de remoção. Porque
vulnerability
você
or the
apresentou algumas coisas, mas
displacement.
você não
Because you
disse.
presented several things, but
O programa está mais
But
relacionado a
is
quê,
the
né? Tem
program is more
resultado mais
related to
parecido com o
what?
Rio de
Is
Janeiro,
it
assim,
more
que é um
similar
programa
to Rio de
que
Janeiro
está
as a program
articulado com
that is
remoções,
articulated
ou
with
seria um caso mais parecido com
displacements and
Sobral, que
removals,
tem a ver
or
com
is it more similar
vulnerabilidade
to Sobral and related to
queria entender um
vulnerability
pouco mais.
situations? I would
Só
like to
para
understand a
finalizar,
little bit more
então, a
about
partir
that.
dessas perguntas que
So
você
just to
fez,
conclude from these questions that I've made,
mostrar que uma
yeah,
política
I
com
would like to
aluguel é
show that
diferente da
a
política de habitação
policy with
habitacional.
rent
O
that is
aluguel ele
different from
tem
a housing policy. It
características
has
dele
this
que é a característica de
characteristic
flexibilidade.
of being
Flexibilidade
more
no tempo,
flexible,
flexibilidade no
flexibility in
espaço,
time,
flexibilidade dos
flexibility in the
atores
space, flexibility
que
in the
estão
actors
articulados
that
com
are
ele, né?
engaged and
Isso faz
articulated.
com que a articulação
Yeah,
entre a
this makes
política
this
pública,
articulation
poder público,
between
morador
public
e
policy,
mercado,
public powers, inhabitants, and the
ela seja
market
muito diferente em cada um
is
dos lugares, né?
different in each
Então,
place.
eu coloco como uma questão para a gente
And
todo mundo
this is an
pensar
issue for
aqui,
us to
né?
think about.
Como que algo que
And how
pode
can
ser
something that can be
muito
very
desarticulador do território ou
something
das
that
comunidades, né? Como que eu
de-articulates
coloquei
and
aqui em São
de-engages the
Paulo, Rio de Janeiro,
communities,
por
because
exemplo,
what
é
I've seen in São Paulo and
desarticula
Rio de Janeiro, the
territórios,
policies that we
desarticula
see in São Paulo and Rio de
comunidades,
Janeiro, we have a
desarticula o próprio aluguel,
de-articulation, we have
né? A dinâmica
disengagement, they
imobiliária fica
disengage the
desarticulada, é
people,
um grande
the
desarticulador,
whole
né?
real estate
Político,
dynamic is
social,
de-articulated
territorial,
politically,
enfim.
socially, territorially. We
Mas ele
see this
pode ser um
disengagement,
instrumento
but it
interessante
can
da
be an
gente pensar mercados
interesting tool
regulados,
to
né?
think
A partir do poder
for
público ou, como a Rosane colocou
regulated
aqui, a
markets
partir de
from
autogestão da própria
the
comunidade em
public
articulação com o poder
government
público
or from the
e mercado,
community
né?
in
Então, o
dialogue
aluguel
with the market
ele é
and
um
the
instrumento muito
government.
poderoso,
So
né? Se a gente pensar nisso.
this is a
Então, eu
very
queria
powerful
deixar essa
tool
questão
for us
aqui
to
para
think
vocês,
this rental
porque
policies.
quando a gente pensa em aluguel,
When we think
não é só
on
a
about
solução
rent,
do
it's not
público
just
com
a
aluguel
solution
social que
for the public, for the people. It's also a flexible tool, and we can use that flexibility in our favor. It's not what we've been seeing, because liberalism has not let us do that or think about that. But if we do not start now, that is what's going to happen. It goes to the wrong side, to the bad part. We only talk about the social part, and we leave it very loose. The rental assistance becomes very loose, but so how can we use that in a more controlled way and in our favor? And I think we have several cases here that lead our thought in that direction. Thank you very much. Thank you. I just want to put a few questions from the YouTube chat, and then we can think of the answers, because we have a short time left. We have two cross-cutting questions, so all of you can answer. From Rita Barbosa, she says, how to integrate social housing assistance and job policies in order for them to become sustainable and migrate and generate autonomy. How can universities contribute with proposals in order for all government branches be able to implement them? We also have three questions that are specifically directed to for Rosana. I would like to hear Rosana talk about if there is some protection against evictions from families under the rent and under social rental in case of default. And another question for Rosane is there any formal guarantee for the Córrego do Feijão community that at the end of the Vale's period of management, it will transfer the property of this real estate to the community? Now we have a question also for Thalia about Natal. What judicial assistance did the community have? Was there any calculation on the losses of each family and any other assistance in addition to the housing? And now we have 3 minutes each to answer. Please, Luciana, you may begin. Okay, I'll have 3-4 minutes. Thank you very much for the questions and your comments and for all the presentations. I have to begin with Rita's question. I think the university has several roles, especially to pressure the government and in content creation and data dissemination. And we have this flexibility is also mirrored in data building and have more information in order for us to be able to build this critical thinking on public policies. And I began my doctoral studies when we did not have any information. Isadora was one of the few people who had some material at that time. From the charts that I showed the entering of new beneficiaries in the policy and the payments done by the state government. They were very specific to each case. In the case of the municipality, the graph that shows a tendency in reduction is a reduction in entering families, which is not reflecting the reduction of payments, because also people are not leaving the program. So when you see the payment chart, it is different. It doesn't reduce. And of course, we had that peak in 2010 in which the municipality used these social programs, and then there was a reduction in removals. And in 2018, when we have a change in the administration, there's a new peak. And I understand that it shows these changes because we have removals in these 3 or 4 communities of occupied buildings now and that's when we have another peak, and then we have the entering beneficiaries from those communities. Then political purposes, for political reasons. And then we have the space, although we wall da minha casa, minha vida was emptied in the Bolsonaro government. People either leave because they did not meet the criteria, or they were not able to show some documentation. And one of the leave-in categories is resolved, which I do not understand because I don't know what it means. What is resolved? I mean, maybe I don't know, maybe they got some money and left the program to rent somewhere else. And from 2018, when we had this new mayor, the decree that defines that who enters due to risk cannot renew for over 1 year. So that also makes people leave in time, which I believe is very violent because someone lost their house in a catastrophe and then they are penalized because they cannot renew the program, even if they were not able to recover yet. And we have low enter in the social rental because we have less removals happening for several reasons. And the state government wants to end the queue of social rental. They want to finish it. They don't want anyone else entering the program. So whoever entered at the time of the PAC entered. And this the chart shows how people are leaving until 2021. But we had a recent rainfall which increased the number of payments again. So from the state government, it's easy to understand for us to understand the entry and exit reasons. And in the municipality, no one enters anymore unless you have a climate catastrophe. Because it's the people of the PAC program that is being resettled after over 14 years, and those that are victims of some climate catastrophes. So these are the hypotheses that I think that are what I have seen. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to call Luana and Lessa. Okay, so we cannot state the reason of creation of the law because we were not here at that time, but what we see is that the 2017 law is very recent program at Ivo Gomes administration, which is ending now. And his idea for housing was the renovation of houses and the transformation into masonry houses. It's more of a renovation. It's more this was the demand to have a place for these families to stay while their houses were being renovated. But while at the same time that this benefit is created and it opens by the law, this great openness of people who are can apply for this benefit, like it's a low income. I think 60 to 70% of the people of Sobral are low income families. So even I could enter this social rental law of Sobral. So we have these families that entered because of extreme vulnerability situations. And we have families that entered in 2017 and that are under the program until now for over 7 years and with social rent, because there was this 2-year limit, but then there was this decree that allowed for renovation. If the social situation did not change, it doesn't change. So it didn't change because people do not overcome the social vulnerability situation. And we tried, but weren't able for the lack of institutional structure to create a structure to develop jobs and income, but it did not happen. So it was a period of failure of the housing policies, everyone depending on the municipal policy. So we were not able to build new sets. And these 8 years of management, only 200 or 300 units were produced of small sets. And when we have these new projects, when we have these new projects that had problems with flooding and similar, the social rental people who entered without a perspective to leave were always placed as priority for these projects.
But they were very few, and in Sobral, we also have a problem with the territorial division. It's a city with 200,000 inhabitants, but it's very segregated. So people from one neighborhood could not be a part of a housing complex in a rivaling neighborhood, so to speak. So there was also this complexity of that issue. And that's it. Many challenges, but I think the Sobral case is interesting because it could be a very good policy because income is equivalent to the demand of the city, 450 reais. It's a very small city and it could work. We can work on a case-by-case basis with the families, but housing, it's very hard for a local government or for a public manager that has to find a public manager that has housing as a priority. That's it. Thank you, Lessa. I will now invite Rosane, please. First, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to participate in this seminar. It's been incredible, and many issues were addressed, a lot of food for thought. And even though the Brumadinho case is very specific, like Isadora said, it allows us to think about many things that are related to the building of a housing policy that understands rent within a territorial planning perspective, that regulates rent in some way to turn it into an instrument for dignified access to housing. And I will answer Nat first about you're talking about the defaulting of payments, right? So currently this project is being built on a daily basis with community associations and with the residents in a permanent dialogue forum. 14 houses were rented and these houses are monitored. And there are different rent values according to the family profile, and these amounts were agreed with the residents, with the communities. So there is a concern with avoiding default, but there's a bigger concern with there not being eviction. So it is possible to have flexibility. This project aims to guarantee permanence, and the formalization of this management is our current challenge. And this is very much related to the question asked by Isadora, what should we do when Vale is no longer active there? This is our main issue here. We want our work to be consistent. So if we're doing an urbanization investment to benefit a community, and if that benefit starts creating land valorization or a production of added value that gets out of control, and that community is expelled from the area, it loses its meaning. So it's a preemptive action. And from what I saw throughout the week, and we have the team that's analyzing this, that has been discussing this, the model that's coming up more strongly is the co-op model because it would give more stability. We currently don't have a public policy to support this. It is a completely autonomous initiative, which would be about creating in the Córrego do Feijão region a self-management ability. And the only model that seems to create more stability and to give more stability for Vale to don't make the donation to this co-op or to this organization, which will be turned into a co-op, is the co-op model, which may be working with association criteria and also a governance ability that creates forums of coordination with community associations and with the producers and farmers association, which is another association that was created in the Córrego do Feijão Rio. We are currently in the eye of the hurricane, and the project should be finalized until 2027. And the idea would be to have a finalized model until then. And our target is 2027 and to have that until 2027, but it depends on what is agreed and if the community wants to take up that leadership. Currently, they have taken on the protagonism to tell Vale that they can't do anything there that doesn't go through them. So that is the agreement, but that agreement needs to gain more strength and to be formalized in order to become stable. And the stability that we see for the near future is the creation of this organization. And the format that seems to be more appropriate so far is the co-op mod. If you could please conclude. I will conclude, even though I have a hard time concluding, as you noticed, because so many reflections. And my interest in coming here was exactly that, to hear from other people what they're thinking about in this topic so that we could think together. And to conclude, I really liked what was said this morning by Thiago Calil. I think he touched on a very sensitive point. Participatory processes today demand patience and demand that we respect the differentiated timings of each group that we're working with. So we think about a co-op, but what about this community? How does the community see this? And the building of this idea that a collective property will bring benefit to the community and not take away people's rights is something that we're doing because it's a fact. The fact is, currently we have a real estate stock that is being put at the disposal of the community to control how that dynamic is going to happen there. But it's very innovative. It's almost anarchism because there's no state in this story. It's very hard because regrettably there is no state because there currently isn't a policy that we can use as something to strengthen this process and to cause it to gain scale and to be replicated. The way in which we see we can replicate it would be through co-ops. Thank you, Roseanne. And now, Thalia. Hello. About the legal assistance that the families had, the Public Prosecution Service, ever since 2014 until now, is responsible for this legal aid, and there are meetings every year. This year, we had a meeting with the Public Prosecution Service where they asked the local government and CAEG to do what was agreed, which was in addition to giving people the houses and of them being relocated to that residential unit, that also a series of actions would unfold, like improvements in the draining system, public lighting, basic sanitation in some parts of the neighborhood that still were not implemented by the municipality, and the municipality claims that they offered the families compensation so that they could move to other neighborhoods in the Natal municipality, but the families did not accept it because they wanted to keep on living in Mount Luisa because it's where they lived throughout their lives and that's where they wanted to living. The Mãe Luisa residential is in the Mãe Luisa neighborhood, not in the center of Mãe Luisa where they lived, but it's still in Mãe Luisa, so they accepted moving there. And
Eu não sei
about
dizer se eles receberam, mas
compensation
eu
in
acredito que
terms of
eles vão ter
financial
recebido, para
compensation,
além
I don't know
da
if
casa.
they got any, but I
Porque
don't
eu
think
sei
they
que o
did
município de
beyond
Natal alega
getting the house. I know that the
que,
municipality of
assim, com a
Natal
boca muito
claims
cheia, de que
with their
Natal
full
é
chest
o
that
município
Natal
que tem a
is the
maior taxa
municipality
de
that
auxílio
has
aluguel
the highest rate
do
of
Nordeste, assim,
rent
e que
aid
como se por isso
in the
bastasse.
Northeast region,
E
as if
porque
that was
eles pagam um
enough,
salário mínimo, por isso basta, e eles não
because they
precisam estar
pay
indenizando
minimum
ninguém com
wage.
um valor financeiro
They wouldn't
pela
need to
perda
compensate
da sua
anyone for
moradia.
losing their homes.
Mas, assim, eu sei que o Ministério Público
But
acompanha
I
isso.
know that the public
E até
ministry,
hoje, né,
that the
o
public
município de
prosecution
Natal
service has
entra
been
gestão,
following
sai
this,
gestão, e ainda não
and
fez
but still
tudo que
the
foi dito
government
para eles
hasn't done
fazerem, apesar
everything that
da
was
CAEM
promised that
e
they
da
would
Prefeitura de
do
Natal
and that
já
they
terem
were
sido reconhecidas como
judicially told to do,
os
even though
causadores do desastre,
the
por causa da
municipality and the
negligência.
local government of Natal
Então,
were
sobre a sua
recognized
pergunta
as at
de
fault
assistência
for the disaster
judiciária,
due
é
to
o Ministério
negligence.
Público
So
que
about
está
your
com
question,
responsabilidade,
in terms
e
of
se eles
legal
receberem
aid, the public
indenização em
prosecution
dinheiro
service
pela
is with the
perda da
community.
moradia,
And if
eu não
they
sei dizer, mas
received
eu acredito que não.
compensation because they
Como eu
lost
falei,
their
foi
homes,
oferecida
I don't know, but I don't think
uma
so.
indenização se eles quisessem
Like I
morar em
said, they
outro
were offered
local de
compensation if they
Natal,
wanted to
mas eles não
move
aceitaram, disseram que
somewhere
queriam
else
morar
to somewhere
em
else in
Luísa.
Natal, but they did not
Né?
accept.
Então, eu
They
espero
said
que
they
eu
wanted to
tenha respondido.
live in
Não sei se
Luisa. I hope I
teve
answered
mais
your
alguma dúvida.
question. I don't know if you have any more questions.
Tá ótimo. Obrigada, Thalia. Vou
Thank you,
chamar agora a
Thalia.
Larice.
Boa tarde, Volta.
Now, Larissa,
Respondendo a Isadora,
good
o
afternoon.
programa
To
de
answer Isadora,
auxílio aluguel
the
social não tem
social rent
vínculo com as
aid
pessoas que estão em
is not
situação
linked
de
to
ocupação nem de
people who are
remoção.
in
Então, o critério
occupations or
do
who are being
programa
removed.
hoje é a
The
vulnerabilidade.
criteria
E
of the
as
program
pessoas que
currently
estão,
is
nesse caso, em
vulnerability.
extrema
And people who
vulnerabilidade,
are, in
não
that
têm
case, in
acesso,
extreme
não estão ligados a
vulnerability,
esse programa.
don't have access or are not
Acho que
connected
era isso.
to that
Muito
program.
obrigada
I
pelo
think that was it.
seminário.
Thank you very much to
Também
the
adorei
seminar.
participar essa semana.
I
Escutei
also loved
coisas maravilhosas,
participating
explodiu a cabeça.
throughout
Estou
the
muito
week. I
agradecida.
heard wonderful things. My mind is
Obrigada,
racing and I'm
Larice.
very grateful.
Gente, eu vou
Thank you,
aproveitar 2
Larice.
minutinhos,
And
já que
I
você deu
will
esse tempinho, só porque
take
eu acho que ficou uma questão em
2
aberto.
minutes because I
Que a
think there was
Nath
an
citou aqui
outstanding question
sobre a questão da obrigatoriedade
about
da Vale, né?
the
Se foi
if it's
dada boa
mandatory
garantia para as
for Vale to
famílias
do this, if
que... Vou
the
repetir a pergunta
families
para
were
ficar
given,
mais fácil.
I'll repeat the question.
Existe
I think
garantia
it's easier.
formal para
Is
comunidades
there
do
any
Córrego do
formal
Feijão em que, ao final do
guarantee for the
período
Córrego do
de
Feijão
obrigatoriedade
community
da Vale
that
de
the end
2027,
of
ela
the
vai transferir a
mandatory
propriedade
period
desses
Vale
imóveis à comunidade?
2027,
Então, é
they
só
will transfer
uma
the
pergunta bem
ownership of
específica, se você puder
these
responder rapidinho.
houses to the community? A very specific
Desculpa, eu não
a very
respondi
specific
diretamente,
question.
porque
Sorry, I
não
didn't
existe
answer that
nenhuma coisa
directly because
formal.
there
O que
is
existe é
no
um processo de
formal
pactuação e compromisso. Então,
agreement.
uma
What we
vez que a
have is a
Vale
pact and
assume
a
o compromisso com a
commitment.
comunidade
So
no
once
momento da
Valley takes
geração,
on the
é um
commitment
compromisso firmado.
with the
Então, a
community,
meta é 2027.
that's
Se em
the commitment. So
2027
the
ainda não estiver
target is
seguro, eu
2027.
acredito que ainda
And if in
podemos ganhar mais tempo.
2027
O
it's
importante
still not
é
secured,
dar uma
we
destinação
could
adequada para
perhaps
esses imóveis. Então,
extend
assim,
that period, but
e depende muito da
the point
comunidade
is
também. Então,
giving
assim,
the
é um
correct
acordo. A
destination
comunidade
to
aí do
the
Córrego do Feijão é bastante ativa e ela
these
tem
houses.
fóruns de
So
diálogo
it also
permanente com a
depends on the
Vale.
community.
Uma
The
vez por
community is
mês tem um
very
ciclo de
active. It
diálogo
has
onde ela traz
permanent
todas as
dialogue cycles
reivindicações,
with
ela
Vale
monitora
where
as
it
ações da Vale
brings
no território.
all of the
É um
claims, it
diálogo permanente.
monitors
Então, essa é a
Vale's
maior garantia
actions
que
in the
existe, né?
territory. So it is permanent dialogue, and that is the biggest
Compromisso
guarantee that we can
firmado
offer.
socialmente aí
It is a
público
socially
que a Vale tem com essa comunidade de levar isso até o fim.
sanctioned agreement to that Vale has to take this to the end.
Obrigada, Rosane.
Thank you, Roseanne.
Gente, queria agradecer a participação
I'd
de
like
todo
to
mundo
thank
nessa
you all for
coluna
your
aqui do
participation.
seminário, mas a
This was
gente
the
vai ter
last
gravação dessa e das
session
demais
in the
no canal do
seminar, and
LabCidade
the
no YouTube.
recording of this session and the others
Convido agora vocês a
will be
continuarem
um,
acompanhando para a fala de
in
encerramento da
the
coordenadora do
LabCidade's
projeto,
YouTube
a
channel.
professora
And I
Lúcia.
invite you all to stay with us because we're going to have a
Obrigada, Bia, pela
closing
introdução.
uh,
Eu gostei da
closing
fala
remarks
aqui.
by the organizer, Paulo Santoro.
Explodiu a cabeça, né?
Thank you.
Foi muito
Thank you,
rico a
Beatriz.
gente
Well, this was a very rich seminar. I would like to thank everyone for being present in these 4 days of seminar. Social rent policies. We were very happy that we received 93 abstracts that were very high quality and that were published in the seminar's records, and that show that there are many things being tested, a set of a lot of research that is very high quality, and the seminar has shown that while we still have a lot to discuss, and I'm leaving here really wanting to keep on debating, but that many policies have already been tested and many challenges have already been mapped. Inspiring or uninspiring experiences were researched, and now we have to, in the coming weeks, kind of digest the debates and understand them. But for now, I'd like to say that it's evident that this is a very relevant topic. We knew that it would be a challenge talking about rent in Latin America, where the housing model is ownership of houses. Our policy is very much geared towards that. But we are seeing an intensification of housing as a business, as an asset, financialized and financializable. We have seen many financialized bonds composing with public-private partnerships, land trusts being regulated or institutionalized. And we also saw that we have in the country that we have many rent-based policies in the country, precarious policies. And I think that perhaps our biggest rent policy has been around for a long time, and its target audience is much wider. But we also saw criticism of these solutions not being used as a housing policy, but sometimes as a sheltering policy, as an emergency policy. And if we're thinking about climate change, we should have a housing policy that considers that the vulnerable people will have to run, we don't know if from floods, from drought. And we also saw that vulnerability being fostered by the rent policy, so forced displacement, temporary rent, new displacement without definitive housing, this perverse, vicious cycle, and this permanent transitioning. And we also saw the rent benefit being read as a complementary income, as just giving a little bit of money and sending people out to the real estate market. And these policies have fostered formal and informal rental, which was very present here, popular territories, and in processes that are actually very dangerous, where the combination between land regularization policies and voucher policies, the aids putting informal rent in a cycle that is supported by these policies that may actually change access to land conditions in informal areas. We also saw many actors involved, including companies and states in the old new PPP model, but also corporations and self-management ideas, impacted people discussing what would be a fair rent or the times and necessities of that population with less or more presence of the state in the form of justice imposing things and not the elected state.
We've also seen several models with housing associations and others that are with nonprofit organizations that I recommend you read about in the minutes of the seminar. We've also seen works about struggles and resistance, and we observe that there's a global movement that fights against the negative impacts of these movements and financialization of rent. We've also seen local movements led by the elderly and by the homeless population, and maybe rental could be a key in trying to solve this problem. And there are also policies focused on gender or gender spread and other populations, and the short-term rental issues really were emphasized, creating these spaces of conflict and bringing about an agenda for regulating rent in Latin America, in which also a complementation of income and is it related to this? And do you see that low-income people are also using rent to complement their income? And we see this in an urban area seen as a possibility to renovate the central and historic areas and to building new housing parks to be used while other renovations are going on. And also the state-owned land issues and the appropriation by the market of these lands also was seen in what the works and in the case of Recife. And the difficulty that the state has in managing these housing parks and having the sales as an option, always pressuring the value of these real estate or the transference to the families, and also the privatization of services and the situation of families has led to indebtedness by families and the difficulty to access to services and to affordable housing by so many people. We've seen several proposals for public policies with different instruments and management forms, and people thinking of steps and stages. If with this policy we do not reach the mercantilization of housing or democratization or more access, more definitive solutions with the solutions with the involvement of the communities and state support and this intersectional view. We even seen some utopias in Miguel Robles' speech yesterday. And we are very happy and satisfied with the results that have been achieved, but especially with the participation of so many people. I feel like we've created a network of research and management revolving around this topic, which excites us very much. And we want to continue to give the topics this visibility. And with this, I would like to conclude my speech. Recommending that you download the minutes of the seminar and the works, and we are updating them, and then they will be made available on our website. But you already have the first version on our page. We also suggest that you rewatch whichever panels you haven't watched. We'll have our playlist on YouTube. It's worth watching again. And I would like to tell you that we will have other events under this project with more dialogue, with also a national seminar with the Association for Urban and Regional Housing, and maybe a national meeting for us to dialogue and deepen the topic. So how are the payments, how is financing in the cities, how is the management in the cities, to talk about production, financing, access, permanence. So they keep tuned, stay tuned with on our website, where we will make available when and how we will have these events. And to close, I would like to call Daniela Pea, our partner in organizing this seminar with the municipality, to complement, and for our final thanks. Thank you, Paulo. Do you hear me? Okay. So thank you to everyone who shared this week of reflections and debate with us. And it's a week of so much screen, because how have we survived the pandemic with so much screen? Because this week was tiring. But I hope to meet in person in our national seminar, where we can have our little gossip and our corridor talks and our coffee breaks. And I would also like to thank all the participants and FAPESP and the Rosa Luxemburgo Foundation and the Observatory on Short-Term Rentals for their support. Also, I would like to thank all the panels, our technical team, but especially our debaters that helped us to elevate the debate in each panel. And with me, I was glad to see so much in women's engagement and women participating in all the works. We also like to thank our speakers and everyone who has shared their studies and their experiences with us. We'd also like to thank our team from Kenai Studios for the broadcast, and then to Dialética for the translation team, and LabCidades and the team from the communications team, and the municipality of São Paulo, especially those colleagues from the housing and planning departments and the intersecretarial teams that have followed this project. I would like to thank all these teams for these partnerships from day one when we started thinking about this together, and during this week in which we were able to share responsibilities, and this such a careful preparation of all the topics and documents, and such a warm welcome that we had from, even with the hard work task to control the time, but everything was done with much care and professionalism. And I would like to thank all of you for sharing more than your work and experiences in public management, also your wishes and desire for better cities through more conscious and serious and just policies, but especially public policies. And because the aim of this project is this interconnection between the private, the university, and the public administration. So I hope that we are able to continue to share our experiences and to build our projects with the hope to find space and struggle for alternatives. So thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you soon in person.
Quiserem abrir as câmeras, quem tá por aí, para a gente dar um tchau e ver as carinhas. Selfie.
Muito bom, gente. Parabéns, viu?